Go ahead, Tanner. Okay, we are live. I don't think we need to take roll again, and we're going to start a little different. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Conrad here in a minute. Just a reminder: we keep it civil, or I throw you out. Any questions? Thank you. So, Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will remain civil. I just want to take this opportunity to recognize those veterans past, present, and the future as we celebrate Veterans Day tomorrow and recognize those who have served our great nation. I'd appreciate this time if you could stand up and join me as I start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Conrad, for that reminder, and thank you to all of our veterans again from the committee, and I think all of us individually and personally. So with that, first up, we have State Geologist Campbell. If you and your team would come up and I'm going to preface this presentation for some of the newer members of the committee. A few years back, State Geologic Survey got a small appropriation of a total of $130,000. $50,000 of that to go to what's called an aeromag study, which is airborne magnetometer studies. And I think you remember the aircraft that used to tow behind them what looked like a big torpedo. Well, times have changed. The technology has gotten so much better. And Wyoming State Geologic Survey, I asked them to come and present to us what that is showing preliminary. They can't give us some data because they have to release it all at one time so that everybody plays on a. But in effect, I think our $50,000 appropriation has turned into the amount of money that geologist Campbell will tell us. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Erin Campbell. I am the Wyoming State Geologist and Director of the Wyoming State Geological Survey. I'd like to introduce my colleagues. This is Dr. Rainey Linz, the Manager of Energy and Mineral Resources at the Geologic Survey, and Patty Weber, our Economic Geologist at the Geologic Survey. And I would also like to thank the legislature for the position that Patty now holds, which has allowed us to do much of this work, which was appropriated in the last biennium budget. So thank you for that as well. Next slide, please. So as Representative Burkhart mentioned, we received an appropriation for $130,000, and $80,000 of that went to direct mineral research. We used that to create 3 publications. There is a helium report, which has already been released, and 2 other publications that deal with types of mineral deposits that tend to contain vanadium and titanium, and those will be released shortly. But what we'll
Director,
yes.
If you would tell the committee where Wyoming stands in the production of helium.
Well, we are number 1 in the production of helium, yes. And we do have other opportunities for helium as well. The $50,000 is what I was going to focus on today. And for this, this was provided as a match to USGS, a USGS project under Earth MRI, which is mineral resource investigations across the United States. And the USGS had proposed a $450,000 geophysical survey over the Medicine Bow Mountains, and the legislature contributed $50,000, which was about a 9-to-1 match. But the dedication and interest that Wyoming illustrated with this appropriation has turned into over $2.1 million in funding from the USGS for critical mineral research. And so it also resulted in another $2 million in ARPA funds that went to another geophysical survey, and we are continuing to propose more funding from the USGS for critical mineral research, and I'll talk about that a little more. Next slide, please. So the projects that we're looking at are on the map on this slide. And in the center is a project that was funded by the ARPA funds, and that is a geophysical survey I'll be talking about. That was the $2 million in ARPA funds, but all of the other projects around the state were funded by the USGS. And what we're doing in these projects is we're looking for zones of mineralization that contain critical minerals. So if we can find one rock type that contains these critical minerals and rare earth elements in one location, we can trace it to other locations and find potential in those other areas. So the goal is to identify the type of rock and the concentration of the elements, predict where else we might find it, release that information to the public, and allow the mining companies to take it from there. So they take our initial research, then they conduct much more detailed studies. Often they'll invest millions of dollars in exploration and hopefully open mines that will create revenue for the state. And the value of these critical minerals and rare earth elements is extremely high, and they're in very high demand. So we have some good potential for revenue for the state of Wyoming. Next slide, please. So I'll be focusing on the geophysical survey that was conducted from South Pass through the Granite Mountains over to Seminole. And for this survey, we had complete discretion as to where we wanted to conduct the survey. So we talked to the mining industry, and the majority of the mining industry members requested this location. And there are at least 5 companies that are currently exploring within this footprint, and several other companies that are exploring just around it. And what this will do will help us identify these zones of mineralization. And these surveys flew for 2 kinds of data, aeromagnetics and radiometrics. And these were flown via helicopter. So next slide, please. As Representative Burkhart mentioned, the helicopter surveys sometimes looked a little alarming. So there was one press release that said, "Don't freak out." This was our favorite one. The helicopters have what looks like a giant Q-tip on the front, and they're flying back and forth at 300-meter spacing, which is very close. So if you're standing on the ground watching these helicopters fly back and forth all day at 300-meter spacing, you could be alarmed. But it has resulted in very detailed, excellent data. Next slide, please. First, I'll talk about the aeromagnetic data, which is looking at rocks that contain magnetic minerals. And what the magnetic data can tell us is what's happening in the subsurface in addition to what we see on the surface, because the magnetic signature can be read to about 1 kilometer's depth or deeper if it's a very magnetic subsurface body. So we can trace these mineralization belts over very long distances underneath trees and underneath sediment and other cover. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the old magnetic data on the left and the new magnetic data on the right. So in the 1970s and 80s, the USGS collected quite a bit of magnetic data across the United States, but you can see compared to our new data, it is not even comparable. So these new data will be extremely helpful to the mining companies as they go out to stake claims and locate resources. It also can be of assistance to the oil and gas industry in terms of identifying faults along the fronts of the mountain ranges. Next slide, please. The other kind of data that we have collected are airborne radiometrics, which is radioactivity, and that can read potassium, uranium, and thorium. This only is read at a much shallower level within about 1 centimeter from the surface. So we can't fly it while there is snow on the ground. And that is a limitation for the data collection. But these data will be also extremely useful in tracing these mineralization belts. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the radiometric data from the same location as the previous data that you were shown. And this is all 3 of the elements combined. So it looks a little noisy right now, but when we pull them apart and they're they're presented in a 3D ternary diagram. They are very helpful in terms of identifying mineral resources. Next slide, please. So that Central Wyoming survey that I just showed you was completed this summer, and the data are being processed now and should be released in the spring. We have 2 more geophysical surveys taking place. In this slide, the small area in red is the Medicine Bow Mountains, and that was also completed this summer. And the larger area in pink is underway. The eastern half has been completed. And this survey extends from Wyoming down into Colorado because these mineralization zones do cross state boundaries. So the eastern part has been completed and the western part is underway. I believe the helicopters are moving to Saratoga or have moved to Saratoga and will fly until there's too much snow for them to continue flying. But in this area of the Medicine Bows, we're also conducting sample analyses looking at composition, age, and other characteristics and the concentration of these elements in this location. Next slide, please. And this is our last slide. And this is just an example of the type of studies that we do on the ground. And this is what we will also be conducting in the areas in central Wyoming and also in the Sierra Madres in the zones where we've had the geophysical surveys. And again, our goal here is to attract interest in mining in Wyoming. It's to support the mining industry that's already here with additional data that will make their job easier and will accelerate the time to having them actually propose mining sites. And the ultimate goal is to generate revenue from mineral resources for the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director? So, Director, back to your slide that you said was kind of busy. So what are the various colors on that side? What do they represent?
The colors on the slides represent the intensity of the signature. And so the brighter colors are higher intensity or higher concentration, and the darker colors are lower concentration. And when the data are processed and released, they will actually have quantitative values to those. Right now, we can only show qualitative relative values.
Okay. So what's been the interest from private industry on the data?
There has been a lot of interest. Particularly the companies that are already operating in that area are very eager to see these data released. And we had originally asked if people had wanted to participate, and since they weren't sure when the surveys would take place, we didn't get any interest. But after they were flown, people were very interested and would like to participate in possibly in future data collection.
So, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you mentioned that you're anticipating a completion date in the spring. Do you have a more exact date or month that you're looking at or you're hopeful for?
Mr. Chairman.
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, we don't have an exact date. The USGS will be performing the processing, and they are conducting surveys across the United States. So our survey is in line, and but we are hoping for this spring. Rainey, any additional? Okay.
Yes, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, the magnetometer is picking up magnetite, and you're doing able to pick up a little bit of RA material. I'm assuming that the other rare earth type materials play in the same type of deposits as the magnetite. Is that correct? And what might those materials be?
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, what the magnetite will show us is where types of mineralization occur. So the magnetite occurs in a certain type of rock. And then if we can analyze those rocks, find the concentration of the critical minerals, and see the entire zone where those form, we can predict that if we move 10 kilometers to the west, we'll see the same concentration. It's not a one-to-one relationship. For all the critical minerals, there are 50, 60 critical minerals, rare earth elements, depending on how you define them. They're present in 245 different minerals. So it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it helps us direct where we should be collecting our samples and running our analyses.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I see on your earlier map in the far west, you had some work that you're doing or were looking at doing in the Phosphoria. Is that the type of stuff that you could be doing in other areas where there are Phosphoria outcrops, like up in the Bighorn Basin or wherever else it might be?
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, that is actually a project that's being run out of the University of Idaho, and it's a regional project. And I might direct this question to Dr. Linz to answer more about potential for the Phosphoria and what's happening in that project.
Dr. Lynn?
Mr. Chairman, so the Phosphoria is known to contain rare earth elements, uranium, and vanadium, mostly in the western part of the state. And it extends into Idaho, where it's a lot thicker and where some of those deposits are actually being mined. So we know that the western part of the state has a higher potential for those deposits.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Up in the basin, we've got a lot of outcrops of the Phosphoria. Have we looked at that stuff much in relation to this, or is it just future work? Where would you classify that?
Dr. Lynn?
Mr. Chairman. So there has been some work done historically in the Bighorn Basin. We actually have somebody going to Lander to that area next week to be working on this. So, you know, there's definitely historic information that we have. We've just found that the highest concentrations are in the western part of the state.
Other questions? So, Director, it's my understanding there's already a company exploring in the Granite Mountain area for nickel and cobalt. And that your feelings on that one? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that is a very interesting prospect, and it has to do with newly discovered ultramafic rocks in that area. And we are very interested to see the outcome of that. And that company has been in communication with us, and we have very much appreciated the information that they've provided to us. And I believe Patty has visited that site as well and got to see that prospect firsthand.
Okay. All right. So you said something, and I think it's interesting for the committee to know. It's a two-way communication. You talk to the companies and they do talk to you, and you're both sharing information to the benefit of Wyoming. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And recently we have had several companies come by the office and ask us what resources we have to offer and publications that we've put out in the past. And they're very interested in the geophysical surveys. And we appreciate their help as well. They have interesting suggestions and ideas that we hadn't thought of, and resources that we don't always have. And so it's been a great relationship that we've had developing with several companies.
All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, just quickly to follow
Yes.
up on that, as these companies engage with you, are they sharing with you, indicating that they're moving forward with some of this? Taking, for example, you spoke about the best part of Wyoming, the western side. Are they talking about moving things forward?
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman. We aren't privy to all of the information that they have. They mostly share their geologic data with us. We follow their press releases closely, and that's where we get most of our information. But Dr. Linz, do you have anything to add in regard to that? Okay.
So Mr. Co-Chair, I don't think there'll be an open pit mine in your backyard quite yet. Okay, so any other questions for our state geologic survey? Great work. And that I think we invested a little bit of money that is showing tremendous return for the state and tremendous potential. And if for most of you, if you don't know, cobalt is one of the highest demand materials in the world right now. And if we have a cobalt deposit, that gives us a lot of economic future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Next up, Andrew, you want to come on up or bring people with you? If you'd introduce yourself for the record and everything, please.
Yes, my name is Andrew Brown.
Oh, yeah,
There you go.
the green one.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Representative Burkhart. My name is Andrew Browning. I am President of Western States and Tribal Nations Natural Gas Initiative. I brought a presentation. Is that gonna?
Just as a preface, Wyoming does participate in this initiative through the our energy authority. So I think you'll see the benefits here. And again, Andrew asked to present, and it's probably a good and timely update on what we're doing to export some more of our natural resources. So
Absolutely.
Andrew, proceed, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Burkhart. Next slide, please. So Western States and Tribal Nations, we're a unique organization in that we have been founded by state and tribal governments to advocate for natural gas exports to the West Coast to Asian markets. Asian markets, right now the world is rightly focused on supplying Europe gas from the, that has been impacted. The continent has been impacted by the Russian-Ukraine war. But the global energy demand for LNG over the next decades is 80% of it is going to come from the Asian markets. Any outlet that is on the Pacific West Coast to supply those markets is going to have a competitive advantage in terms of travel distance, and the Asian LNG buyers and countries view the Panama Canal increasingly as a technical and economic risk. So our organization it's unique. Wyoming has been there since the beginning. If you'll see this is our first meeting together. We were going down to a West Coast outlet, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Energía Costa Azul, and Brian Hassler with the Wyoming Pipeline Authority came with us and eventually signed the MOU. Go to the next slide, please. Our membership is diverse and includes many of the resource producing tribes in the West and the Western governments. The Ute Indian tribe, the Jicarilla Apache Nation, Southern Ute Indian tribe, state of Baja California, Mexico, and I'll get to why that's important in a second. State of New Mexico, Governor Lujan Grisham signed our MOU through her energy department. That makes us both bipartisan and transnational. State of Wyoming through the Wyoming Energy Authority has been a strong supporter from the beginning. And then the Western Colorado counties of Garfield, Mesa, Moffett, and Rio Blanco, they make up the Piceance Basin. Governor Polis, when he came into power, declined to continue with our MOU, though Governor Hickenlooper did sign it through the Colorado Energy Office. We are currently courting, province of Alberta is on our board, and that they are pending signing our MOU, and we are currently courting the state of Arizona and the Navajo Nation. I met with President of the Navajo Nation last week in Window Rock, President Boo Nygren and his staff, and there's general interest in joining. And we've sent them the MOU, and those talks are under discussion. I have the letter up here. I think it signifies kind of the power of the organization, a sovereign group that advocates on behalf of its basins. This is you'll notice Governor Gordon's seal and signature on there. This is when Energía Costa Azul, which is a Pacific Coast it's a LNG export terminal right below San Diego and Baja California, Mexico. And this was sent to the Mexican Energy Secretary advocating for a 20-year permit for the project, saying how important it was to the Western states. And we got word back from the company Sempra Infrastructure Partners that this was a part of the overall discussion when the President AMLO, his nickname, had a state dinner with President Trump a couple of years ago. So I think it shows the power of the bully pulpit that the governments can bring when they're advocating on behalf of their resources. Next slide, please. Wyoming membership, as we said earlier, Wyoming Energy Authority has been an early and important member. Bobby Ralston, thank you for your service, has been our board member since the beginning over the past 4 years. Current companies and counties represented in our membership. Our membership is about 35 at this point. Jonah Energy, Pure West Energy, Converse County, Sweetwater County, Lincoln County, and we are in discussions with the other counties in that make up the Green River Basin as well. So we're hopeful that they'll join us in the near term. Next slide, please. And so it's really about telling the story of the Rockies basins. I think the importing LNG countries are rightly reticent about the current dynamics of global energy markets. The Japanese and the South Koreans, the Taiwanese have their own vulnerabilities on energy security. They rely on Russia for gas. They would prefer to get gas from a Western democracy with sanctity of contracts, rule of law. And we've set up our organization to really tell the narrative of the Western basins, which are not as well known as, say, the Permian or the Marcellus for export. We essentially have stranded gas, right? And so it is, the genesis of our organization was with Jordan Cove to try to tell our story to the Western states. The state of Oregon on Coos Bay. And it's as Jordan Cove, unfortunately, was not a success. We've continued to tell our story to the Mexican governments, the state of Baja California, Mexico, and increasingly the countries of Japan, South Korea. We've got a great relationship. We developed a great relationship with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, which sets Japan's industrial policy and are major LNG movers. And we are going to continue to talk about the innovation that's important to the state of Wyoming to tell its narrative, its brand on decarbonization. Companies like Jonah Energy and Pure West Energy are producing natural gas at de minimis levels of methane. That is increasingly a comparative advantage versus other basins. The Japanese and South Koreans have aggressive net zero plans, and that is an important part of the dialogue. Next slide, please. I'll just give a quick, backdrop of some of our major stakeholders. Japan and the Asian markets. I've talked about this. They have significant energy security focus. They are evolving towards lower carbon natural gas and increasingly decarbonized ammonia, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The Biden administration, there has been kind of a tug of war on the role of natural gas within the administration, how supportive it would be. They are focused quite a bit on carbon capture, sequestration, hydrogen. But I think we've engaged through a number of groups in great dialogue with them on the importance of natural gas, on energy security, on decarbonization for the Asian nations. That was reflective in the G7 summit communique that happened last spring. Arizona, Navajo Nation, all pipelines are going to go through Arizona that go through to Baja California, Mexico. They're an important part of the puzzle. We are in dialogue with Governor Hobbs' administration, and as I mentioned earlier, are already talking with the current Navajo president, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to bring them in sometime in the first half of 2024. California has its own issues on high natural gas prices, aggressive anti-fossil lobby, but the major utilities are SoCal, PG&E are looking at hydrogen and decarbonized gas, and so these are significant opportunities for Wyoming to engage at a sovereign level through our organization, and to tell its story. Next slide, please. a quick overview. This is, I love a good map. And this shows Energía Costa Azul. This shows one of the plants and some of the routes that they are considering. Again, you're looking at, this data is a little bit old, but I think it does give perspective on where they're considering their gas to come from. And as we started this organization, I would say, we were probably way behind the Permian in terms of consideration for supplying this particular LNG export facility. But as I said earlier, the Rockies basins are dedicated natural gas producers. They have some of the lowest carbon. They have the cleanest molecule, I would say, maybe globally, and that's becoming more and more of a comparative advantage. The Permian obviously has significant outlets on the U.S. Gulf Coast, but again, I won't get too deep into the technical issues with the Panama Canal, but they're experiencing significant drought there and are cutting cargoes in half going into 2024. Anyone with an outlet on the West Coast is going to be in a fantastic position, and all we need is a couple of pipelines to get there. If we can go to the next slide. And I apologize for the shape of this next one. It's a little bit blurry, but I think you can still see those three outlets: Energía Costa Azul, Mexico Pacific Limited, and the last one on the bottom, name escapes me, for the Vista Pacifico. Altogether, those represent almost 45 million tons of natural gas export. The Mexico Pacific facility is just getting started. We've had meetings with them. They are initially going to be taking Permian gas, but at 30 million tons, you may want to diversify your basins. And again, they are very much interested in the decarbonization efforts of our producers and how that might support their marketing goals. And they do have long-term vision on hydrogen as well. Next slide, please. And so, this actually, if you wouldn't mind just skipping to the next slide. And so what have we been doing in terms of developing these markets and developing partnerships with the Asian countries? We co-hosted a forum last December in Grand Junction, Colorado, with the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. They came and spoke and had their Director General of Oil and Gas and laid out kind of the Japan requirements on supply, on decarbonization, on energy security. We took that forum to Washington, D.C. Last year on Capitol Hill, right as we were approaching the G7 summit, and the Japanese were anxiously scrambling to get energy security and LNG as part of the agenda. And there was quite a bit of pushback from parts of the Biden administration, and we co-hosted a forum right as those discussions were happening. Hosted the vice minister of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, who basically told the Washington audience, which included Senator Barrasso, who gave some opening remarks, that if you don't supply Asian markets with your natural gas, the Russians are going to do it. They're very kind of succinct that this is this is not only an energy supply issue, this is a global kind of geopolitical issue that the United States needs to engage in. We are going to be hosting the Asian Natural Gas and Energy Association at the Colorado School of Mines this fall, right leading up to Sarah Week, with the hope that we'll pivot into a trade mission to Japan, to Singapore, about probably Q3 of next year, with what I hope will be a significant Wyoming representation of companies, staff from your committee, representatives from your committee, and the governor's office. Next slide, please. And then, finally, our continuing to define our comparative advantage. Decarbonization efforts resulting in differentiated gas is an important part of the value chain. We have the reserves. We know we have 500 trillion cubic feet. It's a matter of getting it to market. The Japanese, in particular, are very much interested in the Wyoming infrastructure, the bonding authority for financing. But Wyoming is in a leadership position to make its bonding authority a tool, but it needs to be more defined more clearly, and lack of state backing complicates things as its value as a financial tool. And then, continuing to tell our story is important on responsible gas certification, and developing and connecting with the universities on those tools that are making those tools, and continuing to hone our data, which we've developed quite a data set on, our efforts to make the Rockies natural gas molecule the cleanest molecule in the world. Next slide, please. So a couple of slides. This is the tribal component is also an important piece of the political equation of our organization. These are our tribal members, along with the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, at our forum in Grand Junction in December of last year. Next slide, please. And this is our board of directors being hosted at Energía Costa Azul. That is the Pacific Ocean to our back. And that is what it's all about, how we get our gas to the Pacific Ocean. I think I've used up my time. Any questions, sir?
Any questions? Representative Larson, and then Conrad, and then Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's we appreciate the work that your organization is doing, and I guess, and maybe I missed it in your presentation, I apologize if I did, but what importance do you place on point source versus direct air capture within your organization? Do you prefer point source, or do you see a value in both?
Mr. Brown?
I think any efforts to decarbonize is going to be important. I don't know that we've taken a specific position on carbon capture, but being able to relay those technologies to the Japanese, and our companies are major innovators of those technologies, is an important part of the discussion.
Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Sandel, thank you very much for your educational presentation. A question to you that I am having a hard time reconciling in my mind is, obviously it's a great thing to see exportation of natural gas. Obviously, it's a benefit for obviously your organization as well as the state of Wyoming. My concern is that within your 2021 report, there is a value associated with the displacement of coal, which is going to supplement that. Obviously, as a coal producer, the largest in the United States, Wyoming, my concern is twofold. First, are we supplementing or promoting more natural gas into the state and or elsewhere at the demise of coal and or this unfortunate slope we're on with a diminishing coal production? The second part of that is, if there's so much abundancy of natural gas, why is there a priority in terms of whether that natural gas, LNG in this case, is prioritized to the United States usage in terms of reducing the amount of costs per MMBTU versus exporting it overseas to other users or other countries?
Mr. Browning?
Yes. So to your first question, the decarbonization effort, it is not, the discussion is not an issue about displacing Wyoming coal, but it is a discussion on increased China emissions from power generation. And it is a theoretical, as we have been trying to find export facilities on the West Coast of the United States, that has been a blunt force instrument that environmental groups have used against any type of export. And the effort under our study was simply to lay out a tool for companies and countries that are looking to reduce emissions, what natural gas produced in the Rockies could help them achieve towards their own kind of energy policy. To your question on exports in the versus consumption in the United States, right now the United States is producing about I think 102 BCF a day. We're exporting about 10% of that. The gas prices, if anything, have gone down since we've been increasing LNG. I think what it does is provide markets for natural gas companies like Jonah and Pure West to aspire to. And I think, if you look at every time that we do a reassessment of our natural gas reserves with best available technologies and practices, we continue to ramp them up every time they use them. At this point, we have 100 years. If we quit exploring today and found no new gas, we'd still have 100 years of supply under current conditions. So I think, it's important, and this is an increasing part of our discussion. It's an important economic soft power tool for the United States to support its allies on broader kind of geopolitical issues without, frankly, damaging its own economy, manufacturing base, et cetera.
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think it's admirable and I fully support that. It's interesting within your report, it talks about displacing China and their obviously greenhouse gases, et cetera.
Yes.
From my understanding, and more importantly studying, I believe the Chinese for every 2 weeks are commissioning a new coal power plant.
Right.
So I'm wondering at what point, and this is a political question, which I would preface by saying, wouldn't you agree that it doesn't seem to me that Wyoming should be the reducer of Chinese net or carbon taxation at the expense of Wyoming coal and or consumer prices on natural gas?
Mr. Browning?
The argument is not amongst ourselves. It is amongst the groups that are trying to say that any whether coal or natural gas increased usage will destroy climate change obligations under the government of Oregon. This is where we first kind of formulated our study. They seem to think that a carbon molecule stops at Oregon, and what we were simply the intent of the study is to simply show no, the world is in this together. We can decarbonize together, and it's important. The United States is leading on both reducing coal and natural gas emissions. And that is the low-hanging fruit in terms of global climate change challenges, is exporting our products to nations like India, like China, that are increasing their emissions more than we can reduce them. So, thank you.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to go to the points you were making about the Energy Authority's bonding capacity to help develop infrastructure. And yes, it's not backed by the full faith and credit of the state. That's something we've talked a lot about in the past. But I wanted to understand a little bit more about, is there a specific infrastructure need with a clear associated cost that could get done if the resources were available? Or is it more speculative that at a high level, we need to build out more infrastructure, but we don't necessarily know exactly what can and should be done?
I think there are various approaches towards infrastructure, but right now the existing pipeline capacity going to the West Coast, supplying California. So the Energía Costa Azul project right now is they're moving dirt on the original facility was an intake facility when we thought we'd be importing gas 20 years ago. It was built by Shell. We have reconverted that to an export facility. It is only taking half a BCF a day, but when we were out there were 2,000 men building this facility and moving dirt, and it should be going into operation in 2026. That is using existing infrastructure, half a BCF a day. To get to the holy grail of 12 to 15 tons, we'll need new infrastructure, and we know where it needs to be built. It is and there are various routes that can be taken from through Utah, obviously through the San Juan hub in New Mexico. So we know pretty much how much gas they're going to need and what the cost is going to be, but it is speculative on the route on which they would take at this point.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, the pipeline infrastructure capacity to provide the full output that the new terminal is going to be capable of, that is the limiting factor. And
that is the limiting factor, right? So I probably
Mr. Browning
for myself the half a BCF a day is through existing El Paso network that is at capacity for California right now.
Understood. And Mr. Chairman, looking at it then from Wyoming's perspective and putting together some type of a plan where if we wanted to provide support, whether it's through the existing bonding capacity of the Energy Authority, or if the state wanted to consider something which was augmented relative to that, as you suggest, would bring more interest. I guess I'd be interested in seeing this better fleshed out of
Yeah.
what those terms could look like to be effective, what the timeline would look like, and what effectively we could be guaranteed as a result of such a project. Because if it ends up being economically favorable for the state of Wyoming, so that we can be using or providing Jonah gas and gas from around the rest of the state to that pipeline to fill up the capacity for the LNG terminal, that could be something we would consider. That's where I get to, how fleshed out is the plan? I think it would be worth fleshing that out, and whether it's your organization or the Energy Authority or working in concert to figure that proposal out, we should have that on the table so we understand what the implications are.
We are,
Mr. Browning?
we are right with you, and we are busy fleshing that out.
Great.
And hope to have some data, an approach for the committee, sometime in first half of 2024.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, Representative Heiner, and Representative Heiner is going to be the last question. We do need to move on. As most of you know, we have, what do we have? 7 or 8 bills to consider. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Mr. Browning, I've been reading about Japan's change of focus to more hydrogen and even more the decarbonized ammonia. Wyoming, with its vast resources of fossil fuels, how can we get in front of that and be a part of this change in Japan to more ammonia? Because ammonia, of course, is safer for transport.
Yes.
And that's why they're focusing on that. So how can Wyoming get out in front of that?
I
Mr.
think
Browning?
that is something that we are starting to embrace as well. There are a number of projects, ammonia export projects in the United States moving forward. I can tell you, the last time when we met with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, they indicated they want to be a market maker for decarbonized ammonia, the same way that they pioneered the LNG industry in the 70s and 80s. Decarbonized ammonia we see as a huge opportunity from export north through British Columbia, with the idea that possibly we could get a U.S. West Coast terminal, especially if we went from focused on reducing carbon emissions and carbon capture. But really our outlets right now would be in Canada and Baja California and Mexico. And our board, we've had a number of discussions about this with our board of directors, and they are fully supportive. I can tell you we are hosting a forum with Colorado School of Mines in March on clean energy exports with a focus on Asian audiences from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, South Korea and Japan, about the potential for decarbonized ammonia and LNG exports from the Pacific West Coast. So we are working on it, and hope to have some high value discussions, sometime in Q1 2024.
Okay, Mr. Browning, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So let me say one thing to the committee. There are ongoing projects that I know that Mr. Browning knows of, I know of, but at this time they are not available for public discussion. I can tell you that there have been discussions with the Mexican government over the years about shipping coal out of Baja. And as far as I know, they're still interested in doing that. But again, these are very preliminary. They're considered business confidential, mainly due to the economics of the project. So with that, we will move on to our bills. Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So I'm going to change the order up a little bit on this. I know that some of these bills will have a considerable amount of discussion on. So, I mean, we have all weekend. Besides, if we go too much overtime, we can come back tomorrow and Sunday. That's a resounding agreement. Okay, so thank you. So let's start with the cease and transfer bill. Director, if you want to come up, what's that? Director, if you would briefly explain this bill for the new members of the committee, and yes, I'm with the good senator, we can just move it and vote on it. But before you proceed, I apologize to all the people here and the people on Zoom. Is there any public comment on the last 2 topics? on the State Geologic Survey or Western States Tribal Nations Consortium? No, okay, thank you. I apologize. I missed that point. We try to allow comments on each of these, and I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Browning when I realized that. So, Director, if you would proceed with discussion of cease and transfer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so just very quickly, back in 2013, the legislature passed statutory provisions to provide funding to local communities that wanted to either cease taking waste to their local landfill or construct a transfer facility and have their waste then transferred to a more regional facility. The reason behind this was that we had done a study of the 112 landfills in the state and determined that there were impacts from about 80 of those. It became very apparent that small communities could not afford to could afford the cost of managing, operating, and closing a landfill. And so the state created this process whereby communities could apply to the State Loan and Investment Board for funding for, originally it was up to 75% of the cost. And then for certain circumstances, we can go up to 100% of the cost for a transfer or closure project. We started with 52 projects on the list that were approved by the legislature. We have worked through that list. Right now, there are 16 projects remaining on the list. We had estimated the cost back in 2013 at around 96 million to complete all of the projects. Right now, the estimates are that by the time we get through all these projects, the cost should be somewhere around 76 million. So we're within the range of what was anticipated. So each year we come back to the committee with a updated priority list, and that's what you have in front of you as a bill, is what's remaining and the priority of those projects. And so that's the purpose of the bill, is to approve that reprioritized list of projects that are remaining.
Okay, Director, proceed. Unless there are any questions for the director. This is the annual bill. We take this bill up every single session to redo that priority list. It gives the legislature a chance to look over these, control the money, but at the same time help our communities. So, Director, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Section 1, page 2, line 2 provides the updated program priority list with 16 remaining facilities. There are 6 transfer plus the one for dead animal management. So those would be considered a transfer. So there are 7 transfer projects remaining at a cost of 7.2 million, 9 closure projects remaining at a cost of 19.5 million. So the change in the list is that 2 projects were funded last year. The Bighorn North transfer station and the town of Moorcroft closure project were approved. Section 2 of the bill repeals the previous priority list from last year. And then Section 3 states that the priority list is effective immediately upon becoming law. So that's the bill.
Okay. Any questions on the bill? Any questions for the director? Okay. Okay. So a couple comments. The carcass portion of this is also done in conjunction with Wyoming Game and Fish, mainly due to control chronic wasting disease, not dumping these carcasses wherever you don't see them alongside the road. It lets community landfills accept the carcasses. Sometimes they have a steel container, sometimes they're landfilling them. I know in my community they landfill with them, but that's it. I think that's a good program because we need to really get a handle on chronic wasting disease in our wildlife and not randomly spread it. So if you have any questions about your specific community or community in your district, chance to ask them. And Director, I would ask you one on the town of Rollins. We still have 780,000. I thought they had completely taken care of closure and their transfer station and everything else. I thought town of Rollins was done. Am I wrong?
Mr. Chairman, it's one I'd have to look into, but we've gone through the list, and if I could just take a minute, I have a list of what's been funded. And there was a project for closure that was funded back in 2015. But the transfer I don't see on the list that's been funded. So if it has, we would take it off the list, but we have it as not being funded yet.
All right. So Director, we can take that offline. I think they've done what they needed to do, and that money might be able to be better used in another community. They're already transferring it. They've purchased part of the Casper landfill, and sorry to say, Rollins hauls its garbage to Casper to dispose of. So, yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Just one point I wanted to add for those that might not be familiar with this process. The D paragraph at the bottom of page 4 and onto page 5 gives the department flexibility to shuffle, modify, reprioritize, or work together on the projects to improve efficiency. And I think that was it. Over the years has proven to be a really effective part of the program. In the legislature, we do a lot of prioritized lists that are strict, and you have to do 1 before you do 2, before you do 3. I think it's been incredibly effective over the years to provide that flexibility to the department to find synergies where they could be more cost effective or do things based on readiness. And that's a big part of why this process has gone so well. So I wanted to point that out to folks that might not be as familiar with how we do this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. So, any public testimony on cease and transfer? Director, you can stay there. You're going to be here for quite a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. I like to be able to support a bill, so I come up every year to say that our organization has supported this program for the last decade. It's one of the most effective groundwater cleanup and protection programs in the state, and we appreciate your support for it year after year. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Anderson? Good. Okay. Thank you very much. So, okay, any other public testimony in the room? Anyone remotely? Okay, with that, I will close public testimony. Committee? Moved by Rothfuss, seconded by Lawley. Okay, we'll go through the bill as normal. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Okay, no amendments on the bill. Committee? Question being called on 24 LSO 0180 solid waste municipal cease and transfer funding. Staff, if you would call roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 24 LSO 0180 solid waste municipal cease and transfer funding. Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Ellis. Aye. Senator Jones excused. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Banks excused. Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Knapp. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley. Aye. Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Representative Dockstader.
Aye.
Or sorry, sorry, Chairman Rod Dockstader. Let's see, Chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 12 ayes and 2 excused.
Okay, to resolve one issue with this bill, because it's an appropriations bill, I believe it needs to start in the House. So no, it doesn't? Not this one? Oh, okay. All right, we'll figure it out later then. And if you want a nice, comfortable bill to present, let Senator Dockstetter or I know, and we can arrange that. If not, you get the tough ones. So, okay, we'll continue then. We took that one out of order. We also have an additional bill that we will take up that came out of yesterday's Regulatory Reduction Task Force. So we need to add that one in, and we'll do that later this morning. We'll handle one or two of these and then take a break, if that's acceptable to everyone. Okay, so we might as well just go in order. Next one is 24 LSO 0058 Limited Mining Operations Amendments. And so this should be familiar. We had this from the last meeting. It needed a little bit of work, and we have work. We also have recommendations out of the Regulatory Task Force, and at the appropriate time, we'll put those into the official minutes, that letter of support for these. So I think, Brian, you normally explain these bills, but I think I'll have the department explain them, if that's okay with you. You got to sit and listen for a while? Okay. All right, Director, Mr. Wentland, proceed with limited mining operations.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let Kyle, who's been the lead on this, I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay.
So,
Morning, Mr. Chairman. So in the overarching of this, what this bill does is it expands the LMO categories beyond the original sand, gravel, feldspar, ballast categories to all non-coal minerals. It adjusts the bonding for these minerals across the board. And we grandfather existing small mine permits. But starting in July 1 of 2024, we would not issue small mine permits. They go away. And then we, at the end, have our exploration licenses, the limited mine operation, and a regular mine operation. That's really what this bill accomplishes. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just start through the bill, maybe would be the best.
Please, Mr. Wentland, just take us through the bill, explain the changes in there. We'll probably have questions as we go.
Sure. And I believe you do have an amendment sheet from us with you as well. So
give me just a moment, please. So
and Mr. Chairman, that was handed out just this morning.
oh,
So-
okay. Oh, I see it. Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair Brian. So you should have it as, hold on just a minute. For the committee, this is it. Okay. So we'll talk about it as we go through. I know the county commissioners have some input on this. And we'll probably have a discussion of the amendments first before the other public testimony, if that's acceptable, so that we understand the amendments while discussion of bill is still fresh in our minds. So I'm sorry, proceed.
you're fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. In moving through the bill on page 2, in section 18.5.201, this was an add by the committee and we're neutral to this. I'll let the committee and county commissioners address this moving forward. In section 35.11.401, line 15, in section 6, actually on line 20, this is where we start into expanding the LMO categories to all non-coal minerals, with the exception of radionuclides. And that's because the radionuclides have to be regulated through the NRC or the existing agreement state that Wyoming has with the NRC. Page 3, top of page 3. Again, this was an add by the committee. I'll let the committee address that. Excuse me, I mean line 20 on page 3. When we move to page 4, and page 4, line 4, start of, this is where this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this bill in my mind. This is where we're talking about how we're going to bond for these activities. And I want to spend a little time on this to make sure folks understand what we're trying to do here and the implications of it. We're trying to accomplish three things here with this section and the additions to this section. The first one is we want to grandfather the existing mineral categories, the sand, gravel, feldspar, ballast, shale categories now and into the future, because we do have small operators that need to be able to bond on a simplified per acre basis. So with the amendment I'm proposing, and I'll get to that, we're specifying what those categories are. In addition to that, we're adjusting those per acre bond rates to current rates because they haven't been adjusted for a decade, since 2014. And then we're also adding for the more sophisticated operators, the large operators like a Martin Marietta or a Knife River type operation that can do a sophisticated full cost bond. It gives them the option to full cost bond or do the per acre rate. So that's what we're accomplishing in that first section. And then in the second section, we're saying all other mineral categories, the new ones that we're adding, like gold, cobalt, lithium, etc., they're going to have to do a full cost bond because we recognize that with those type of mineral developments, there are some additional considerations. With gold, you could have acid mine drainage. So we want to make sure we're full cost bonding them at the appropriate rates. So the amendment we have, if you look on your change on page 4, line 5, we want to strike the language starting at of, and it reads of any non-coal mineral except minerals regulated by the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission and minerals regulated by the state under Article 20 of this chapter. And we're going to replace that with those existing in statute categories to specify those. So the replace is then sand, gravel, scoria, dolomite, shale, ballast, and feldspar.
Okay, so Mr. Wentland, I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute for the benefit of the committee. So Mr. Wentland is discussing their proposed amendments as he goes through the bill. So you probably want to have both of them in front of you, the bill and this handout from Mr. Wentland that was on our desk. And we're back to the gold standard for amendments when they color code them so we know what's going on. So I've said that before, but DQ is the gold standard for submitting amendments to the committee. So proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry, this is a fairly complicated section and it's difficult to explain without the amendment. So then the revised section would read, before commencing any limited mining operation for the removal of sand, gravel, scoria, limestone, dolomite, shale, ballast, or feldspar, the operator shall file a bond. And I think that clarifies what we're trying to do here in the context of my opening statement here. And
committee?
Yeah.
Any questions on this one and the proposed amendment? Okay, I just want to make sure we all understand what we're doing here and that what this change means. Okay, proceed.
The next change, Mr. Chairman, is on line 19 of page 4, and we're changing the 90 days to 150 days. And this is based on some experience with the agency. When a company opens up a pit and let's say they have a big contract come in or they open quicker, there may be a need to increase that bond or adjust it within the first segment of their operation. We found that the 90 days is a little short. 150 would be a little better for us to be able to make that determination to make sure we're adequately bonding these facilities. So that's we're adding or increasing the 90 to 150 here. Then we move to page 5. And again, this is some standardizing language. We're saying that once the bond is set, or they've got 45 days instead of 30, and that's because the director's bond letters that we use for these actions has 45 days in it. So this is some streamlining of the regulation to make them consistent. And then on line 3, it's saying that come July 1, 2024, that everyone's going to have to come up to the new rates of the adjusted rates in the statute for the per acre bonding and or full cost bond. And then we move to line 10, and this is our second amendment, and this is clarifying language. This is again, as a result of some experience with the agency. What we've typically done in the past, or what the statute requirement is that we, once a year in the annual report, we find out if the operator is going to move to reclamation. That's a pretty long delay for us to see timely reclamation on these sites. We'd like to have that set as a 45-day requirement so that we're notified and we know they're going to reclamation. It's better for the bond adjustments. It's better for us to know when to go out and inspect these sites. It's just better coordination between the agency and the operators. With that, we would like to change the word on line 10, anticipate, to the words plan for. It just clarifies what we're doing there. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll continue.
Just continue unless we interrupt you.
We'll go to line 18 on page 5. This section is for the protection of the private landowners. This says if you have one of these pits on your site, and it's not uncommon, that we may have a rancher that says, I want to keep a couple acres in a small face of this pit so I can access that mineral for my own personal use on my ranch roads and that. We're just making sure that we have that flexibility here that applies to these other minerals, because even if you're mining gold, you still may have crushed rock that these guys might want to use or retain on their own private land.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. So the bottom of page 5 uses the same language as what there is a proposed amendment related to on page, well, change 1 above. Should we mirror that amendment to this language as well? This is the.
Mr. Wentland?
I think it is mirroring the language, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rolfus. It is to the front of the bill. This is standardizing language saying it applies to all of the non-coal minerals, that instead of just sand, gravel, feldspar, this would apply. It doesn't matter if it's a gravel pit or a gold pit. If you have crushed rock and you want to retain that for your private use, you have the option to do that.
Right, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
This is identical to the original language. It's the mirror of the original language that's there, but your change 1 proposal on the amendment reverts that original language to the prior language.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. The language that's on the bottom of page 5 is identical to the language that's on the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3 that references the limited mining operations more generally. The change that the department is proposing on page 4 is to split out and make clear the bonding requirements for each of those projects. So Mr. Chairman, I think that's a separate and standalone change that would not need to be made on page 5.
Thank you. That explains it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm sorry.
One
I wasn't
moment.
following your question.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just backing up to page 4 really quick. I was just kind of thinking through that that change from 90 to 150 days extension. Would it be harmful to just make it a 6-month time frame? I mean, did you think that through at all on just making it an even 6 months?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, we did. There's some other actions in the rules that follow the 150 days. So we're just trying to standardize those timeframes.
Okay. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just not following change 2. So can you read how it would, with your proposed amendment, they anticipate getting rid of that word and then inserting plan for? I just want to make sure I'm reading that all correctly.
Mr. Wentland?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it would read such fact and plan for commencement of reclamation and restoration within 45 days.
Okay. All right. Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes page 5 then. And I will move to page 6. Page 6 codifies the reasons I'm going to back up. A few years back, we adjusted the LMO statute and we put a 5-year term on it, and we discussed reasons that in the rules that you can qualify for your renewals just kind of automatically. And we never codified those in statutes. So this section in line 10 is saying we're codifying those reasons. When we get to section K, it'll outline what those are, and we'll follow that in the bill. But this is the statement that directs us to that section of the legislation that says, okay, here's where we're going to lay out what those are. And I will get to those when we get to page 7. I think on line 20, page 6, this is just corrective language from LSO. Mr. Chairman, page 7. This section is important because this is the section that grants, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up to page 6, line 13J. When you read the whole section, that is a section that authorizes small mine permits. And like I said in the outline of the bill, we're going to eliminate small mine permits at the end of June of 2023 or 2024. And then we will grandfather those, and we will not issue small mine permits beginning July 1, 2024. So that's what this add and starting in line 2 through 9 does. With that said, it is not specific to limited mining or limited surface or limited mining operations. So this is our final amendment that we're proposing to take out limited surface, capitalized mining. So it would simply read, for reclamation liability period, mining operations authorized, because that's more specifically directed to the small mine permits. Are there any questions with that? Mr. Chairman, then moving to line 17, this is an add because we do get revenue and mineral audit, and they do come in and look at our annual reports for tonnage production. So we're just making it clear that that's part of the annual report. And then line 20, this is where we start into the 5-year term renewals that I talked about earlier. It spells out that you can go beyond the 5 years if you have meet any of these categories that are outlined in line on page 8, such as a long-term mineral supply contract, a government project. YDOT bids the projects out 3 years ahead of time. So we want to make sure if they know they have a project they're going to bid on, that they can keep their pit open. And that just follows through page 9 through G with those reasons, and it codifies what we're doing existingly in the agency right now for these. And then when we get to page 9, the bottom of page 9, line 26, when you go to a regular mine, there's the reclamation performance standards are a lot more involved for these larger acre mines, like a large coal mine or uranium or trona operation. These small 15-acre sites, what has been done historically by the agency is we go out and we say you have 2 good years of growing seasons. We go out, we do a physical inspection on site. Do you have stable surface and established grass on that surface? And if you do, we release bond. We're codifying that and making it clear that these 15-acre sites then are going to fall under those standards moving forward with this bill. That language has to be coordinated in both 3511-417 as well as 3511-423 for consistency reasons. So they cross-reference correctly. And Mr. Chairman, with that, that's my walkthrough on your bill.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Wentland, for the director, limited mining operations? So, just a reminder, the committee, while we discussed their suggested amendments during discussion of the bill, those amendments will be handled separately as we work the bill. Okay, so no questions. With that, I know there are some comments on this. bill. And so I'd ask, I think the county commissioners have a recommended amendment. So we'll ask them to come up, please, Mr. Riemann.
And Mr. Chairman, maybe for efficiency, I would just ask that those online who wish to comment, raise their hands so we can be prepared for them.
Okay, everyone online hear that? Raise your hand if you have suggested amendments to the bill that you are being very specific about. But I also want all the other public comment too. So, Mr. Riemann, please proceed. And I believe we have a letter from the County Commissioners Association, a memo. Am I correct? You've handed out and some other information. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Mr.
And
Chairman,
you'll be
members of the
talking
committee.
from those.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Jeremiah Riemann, here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners. I have handed out two documents. One you perhaps received a little bit earlier, a two-page memo. I was able to obtain a copy of the Attorney General's opinion that's referenced in there. I wanted to make sure that you all had that as well. I know it's coming to you this morning. Good luck reading it quickly. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but I'll certainly reference to it. Mr. Chairman, in speaking with the proponents of this legislation, it sounds as if it's important legislation. And we have no reason to oppose it, other than it's developed a little bit of a wrinkle that perhaps doesn't need to exist whatsoever. As all of you know, counties are a creation of the state. We're a creature of the state. We carry out important work at the local level. We are your intergovernmental partner in addressing those issues locally. Unlike municipalities, we can't just legislate. We don't have home rule. We have that which you dictate to us. One of those areas that you have provided a responsibility to counties is around the regulation of various activities within the county. That is your planning and zoning structure that exists to promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the county. And that's what exists in Wyoming Statute 18.5.201. I've provided that full statute for you. In granting that authority, you have excluded certain things, in particular four things from authority, and these are all contained in the memo. One of those is that we can't infringe upon the zoning authority of an incorporated municipality. The second one, and the reason for me being here, and I'll talk more at length, is counties can't prohibit the use or occupancy reasonably necessary for the extraction and production of mineral resources. We can't impede the residential or agricultural uses that are permitted for land divisions, and I provided the statutory reference. And the most recent prohibition that you gave us at the start of my tenure with the association was around private schools, and in particular in Teton County. As I mentioned, I did provide the full statute on the back. I've highlighted the important provision that states directly, no zoning resolution or plan shall prevent any use or occupancy reasonably necessary for the extraction or production of mineral resources in or under any land subject thereto. So we have a prohibition relative to mineral resources. I reference the Attorney General opinion 80-022, which really goes into depth relative to the limitation that that particular prohibition has. It talks about what authorities counties do have, in particular as it deals with the language reasonably necessary. You can find that detailed analysis starting on page 108 of the opinion. Mr. Chairman, it also, as it states in my memo, clearly delineates that we have no authority in the environmental space. You have preempted that for state authority through the Department of Environmental Quality. So this clearly goes through it. Mr. Chairman, that's what brings forward the particular proposed amendment that I've brought to you, which is simply to remove all of the reference to Board of County Commissioners to prevent language. One, because we already have a prevent statute just directly above it. And two, because the language is somewhat different and doesn't contain some important characteristics of the current prohibition, you may be granting these limited mining operations a higher authority than just a general mine that you would find out in the county, a coal mine, for example. So I just think this particular provision complicates what's otherwise what looks like good legislation. I'd suggest that you take it out. If you want to have this conversation, I know there's perhaps some concern in one county. I'm happy to take up that conversation. I don't know that it does us much good today. I don't know all the specifics, but I'm happy to dig into that. But again, I would just suggest we remove this language, move a good bill forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions that there may be.
Questions for Mr. Raymond? Any questions? Senator Dockstader.
Mr. Raymond, then if it's removed, are we limiting the private landholder, the private property owner? Are we limiting his or her ability to do what they wish with their land if they're overridden by the county? Thoughts on that?
Mr. Raymond?
Mr. Chairman, and I think a good read of the particular Attorney General's opinion that I've provided to you would suggest that, again, a county cannot prevent mineral resource development. Can they impose certain regulations? Absolutely, as long as those don't cross that threshold of then preventing that particular activity. And I think it is important that in certain instances, county have permitting authority. When you're having certain development operations next to, say, schools or other assets of a community, or perhaps a residential development, it might be important to have some consideration, not a prevention. You've already excluded that from our authority, but some consideration for those activities consistent with a land use plan, which is also another critical component. You have to have a developed plan before you can move forward with any of these sorts of permitting authority. So, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest no, the intent is not to prevent, but it is to and certainly make sure that we are promoting, again, that public health, safety, morals, general welfare of the county, as you've granted authority to do.
Other questions? Questions? So, Mr. Raymond, I have one, and I'm trying to get my thoughts around it. In effect, what you're saying is statute already does what this additional wording would suggest in the bill. Am I correct? That we have on the books in statute, the prohibition we've in effect duplicated here in 18.5, 201, and that, am I reading that correctly? Is that your
Mr. Chairman? Yes, that is one part of my premise here.
So with that said, then it's my understanding that a particular county prohibited the development of the extraction of sand and gravel on a piece of private property. In effect, are we saying that that county then violated state statute by doing that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not directly aware of all the specifics of that particular situation. It's my understanding that the county has not denied a permit at this point in time. There is a discussion between the county, in particular the county staff, and that particular landowner, which perhaps they construe as preventing them from extracting their minerals. But it's my understanding that's not happened. But again, that's where I would suggest it would this conversation would benefit from additional analysis, which I'm happy to help facilitate and engage. I just don't think it needs to happen inside of this bill. And I think it's outside of really where you're trying to go with this bill.
Okay, all right, thank you. So other questions for Mr. Reman? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good to see you. Let me see if I can articulate maybe a different way and make sure I'm understanding what you're saying is that putting this in this statute in this way really raises concerns about whether the legislature is making a different kind of policy decision than is reflected in what's already in statutory law and based on this opinion concerning that there are some things the county can do, but short of using their power to stop something. Is that generally accurate of what you're saying, what the concern you have about this statute and what you're wanting taken out?
Mr. Reman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I think you're exactly right to the second point that I'm trying to get at. One, that this is duplication perhaps of what already exists in statute. And the second is this particular language that's included in the bill is different than the prohibition that exists above. And so that means it has important meanings in having language that's absent, which would suggest that we're taking away certain powers for counties in particular related to only these limited mining operations as opposed to other mining operations that might exist.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, that we are really possibly with language in this particular statute before us, these amendments, either intentionally or unintentionally making a policy change that could be interpreted that way. Is that the essence of it? I mean, duplication is one issue, but duplication, if it's the same, it's a lot of extra paperwork, but it's not in and of itself that harmful. But what's suggested here, I think, is, and I think it's a valid point. It's really this idea of that this could be construed as a policy change because of some of the differences in language and even the introduction of something that happened in a particular county that should have been resolved a different way to determine whether their actions were appropriate or not. So am I following and tracking what, because I'm new here and I'm just making sure I understand.
Mr. Reman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, you're right on track.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
So is the impetus for this new language that we had a circumstance in the state where a private landowner was upset with a decision by the county and there was a request then for us to include that new language? Why is this language here?
Senator, I think I'm going to ask the co-chair to address this. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I think there was a request. So, Mr. Co-chair, can you shed some light on this?
I was looking up my information on that. As I recall, and it comes back to my original question to our county commissioner representative here, the concern was overriding someone's individual rights to do what they want to do with their land. And you were saying, and I missed part of that conversation, you were saying it's already protected. I don't see that it is.
Mr. Reman, do you wish to comment?
Mr. Chairman, I'll try and address both, but again, understanding that I don't have all the details to answer Senator Rothfuss's question in particular. Senator Dockstader, I've provided the language directly from 18.5.201A, which has that prohibition on the prevention. It specifically says no zoning resolution or plan shall prevent any use or occupancy reasonably necessary to the extraction or production. So that's existing state statute that we have no ability to prevent. Senator Rothfuss, my understanding of the particular situation that comes out of Teton County is that we have a landowner that would like to develop a rock quarry on their property, perhaps for use on their property, I believe, as well as use elsewhere. They're in negotiations with the county to and this is at the county staff level. I want to make that clear. It's not made it, as I understand it, to the commissioner level at this point in time, but they're in negotiations about what the impact fee might be for adjacent roads and other infrastructure. And that is not satisfactory to the particular landowner, and thus has risen to a concern that ultimately it will lead to a prevention of their ability to develop that resource. That's as much as I know about the situation.
Follow up?
Yeah, follow up. So as I understand it, this wasn't in really the bill request that DEQ came forward with to create new limited mining operation statute so that we could remove the small mining license or permit, excuse me. This was something that was added in based on a political circumstance in one county. So it's us getting involved in a fight, which is something that we may or may not do. But I just wanted to understand if it was a part of what we need to accomplish to achieve the objectives of DEQ, or if it's what we need to accomplish to achieve the objectives of one individual landowner. To me, that's a separate standalone individual bill. We can fight it out on the floor, but I don't want to break a DEQ request because we have a fight in a county, as we so often do. So as I understand it, I'm seeing nods over there, which is what I was looking for. That's not an essential part of the bill. Thanks. And it wasn't it turned out to be a question for DEQ's nod. So thank you.
Okay. So Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand your argument that maybe this is duplicative. But the other flip of that, though, is if you go down in the bill, then there's reference to 3511-401. And so I started looking at that, and I think that's where there's some distinctions made between, regular mining projects versus the limited mining. And so we do distinguish between the two. And so, I mean, you could make the argument then theoretically that this needs to be there because we want to make it clear that these are two separate things. So I don't know if that, you could read it either way. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. So this,
And your
and if I'm
question
wrong,
is-
but that's how I'm looking at it. I think you really could interpret it your way, or you could say, no, we need this language because there is a distinction in 3511-401. We treat them differently. There are requirements A through D, and then E is where we say, these don't apply to these limited mining operations. So they are different.
Don't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I agree.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I think even if I were to agree, I think we heard that there could be two interpretations here, which is all the more reason that this should be removed out of here and be a separate conversation for discussion, which I'm not opposed to having that conversation and diving into this further if that's appropriate.
Okay. All right. Representative Lawley.
I want to go back, thank you, Mr. Chairman, to Senator Ross's point about we have a situation ongoing, and there is a potential shift here in some policy.
You're leading to a question.
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
And so I want to talk about the fact that, and can you share with what some other remedies are, like in the situation you're in Teton County, which is clearly not fully developed yet, it's in process. There are remedies available if someone feels like that a county or county commissioners are overstepping their statutory authority in this area. Could you share a little bit about what those remedies would be other than legislation like this?
Mr. Raymond.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Wally, obviously this is one remedy. An individual landowner, anybody could bring that issue to your attention and try and have that addressed. The typical route is that you would address it. If it's at the county staff level, you would address it through the county commissioners. And then if you continue to feel aggrieved, you would take it to the courts and move up through that process, which is still available here.
Okay. Right. So did we have anyone else online? Okay, if you would go ahead and admit them. How many do we have? One. Okay, thank you. For everyone who is watching, I took this approach because I knew this would be the most controversial portion of this bill. So that's why I took that approach. We will get to all the public comment. Please just bear with us.
And Mr. Chairman, I just ask that Ms. Bremer just turn her camera on and microphone.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, proceed.
Wonderful. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. My name is Liz Brimmer. I am representing the Jackson Hole Hereford Ranch, and I will be brief. The Jackson Hole Hereford Ranch is a 6th-generation Wyoming family with private property designated for additional housing in multiple Teton County land use plans. Please support your draft revisions to the limited mining operations bill, and thank you especially for the change that prohibits a county from limiting or blocking a gravel mining operation. To affirm mining, we hope you strongly resist any amendments to strike that provision. Instead, please affirm that this state law on limited mining operation is available throughout all of Wyoming and cannot, I have to say it, be undermined. Please keep this provision. It is really belts and suspenders, an important set of belts and suspenders, as I will explain. It is not a fight. It is not political. It is just a request for legislative clarity. We are trying to affirm our property rights under state law and build needed housing on our property. And for that housing project, we need gravel on site for interior roads. And we want to get that gravel on site from our own property. But despite complying with and fully meeting all local county standards for on-site gravel operations, we experienced denial on a basic permit for on-site gravel operations, despite state law, despite county local standards being met. And this was just for a 3-acre on-site operation that is only allowed for 2 years under local county rules. LDRs. The county's unwritten policy was to not issue a permit in an apparent aversion to gravel mining, even if you comply with the county standard. Hard no, denial, a kind of shadow moratorium. In our case, we applied last April for this said permit, and the permit sat and was only dislodged in just recent weeks after the attention of the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. And I would please direct your attention to that task force letter written to this committee. Our situation is we anticipate further future permits to be needed for additional on-site gravel needs for housing development. If the county had continued to ignore state law on limited gravel operations, our housing project would have been forced to truck up to 6,000 truckloads at over $1 million in cost to us, and also impacts state and county roads driving past multiple schools on the way, despite abundant gravel on site. So we ask you, please support property rights, mining, and regulatory clarity. Please keep this important amendment as drafted. It does not take away local control. It just makes sure the state law isn't undercut. I thank you for your time and support.
Questions for Ms. Brimmer? Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Brimmer.
Thank you.
Okay. Continuing public testimony on limited mining operations amendments. Ms. Anderson, you've appeared anxious to speak on this, so come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council. I think I can give a little clarity to this situation. So limited mining operations currently, again, the categories of mines that they cover are surface rights. They're part of the surface estate. And so what Title 18 deals with is the mineral estate. And it's not just for mining, it's for oil and gas. And there have been opinions and law review articles related to county authority for oil and gas related to this section as well. So herein lies the problem of what this bill tries to do. And it's not just about the county authority, of which that is a real issue, and we support the counties in their current authority. I can tell you my county of Sheridan has denied a gravel mine. There was no litigation related to that. They do that through their comprehensive planning, through the conditional use permit process. Again, because it's a right of the surface. So any other agricultural zoned operation that changes into a basically an industrial operation on that land, has to go through the county zoning process and get a conditional use permit for that process. That's what a gravel mine is when it's done on a zoned agricultural piece of land. And so my county has a process in which any gravel mine that is located in an agricultural zone appears before the Planning and Zoning Commission. They seek a conditional use permit. The county has the ability to mitigate impacts, consider roads of county road use, school bus stops, public health and safety issues, and then that recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Board then goes to the county commissioners for their ultimate approval. And again, and at least in one case that I'm aware of in recent memory, our county commissioners have denied a conditional use permit for a gravel mine operation, and for a very good reason, which I'd be happy to go into if you have questions related to that. So that's the county authority. Now, getting to the DEQ portion of the bill, the other concern here is that a limited mining operation is an exemption to a permit. That's what it is. It's not a permit. They file paperwork for the DEQ. DEQ requires a bond, and we do support the bonding provisions of the bill. But there's no public comment. There's no ability for neighbors to get involved in that process. So that's what you're taking away with this bill. And you're not only, and it makes good sense to some extent for, again, the types of minerals that we have with limited mining operations, because they're time sensitive, it's construction season, there's a need to get that aggregate out of the ground in a time sensitive manner. But for gold, for lithium, these are minerals that they're coming to the state. We don't have them right now, but we will, and we'll have them potentially in mines all over the state. And you're taking away the right of neighboring landowners to have a right in that process. That's what you're doing with this bill. And so we do oppose the bill in its entirety, and particularly the portion of the county taking away county authority to be able to have the rights that the counties do currently have. But we do, again, caution you in taking away the right of public participation, because that's what this bill does. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Anderson? Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Henderson, so I understand the argument and support the initiative that local control. But in this instance we just heard about, it appears that, say, the DEQ is approved, but in this case, Teton County has not. So how do you reconcile this? Because I'm hearing mixed testimony and I'm honestly confused, because on one hand you say local control, but local control says no, but the state says yes. So help me reconcile in my mind as we approach this amendment and or the testimony we've heard from the county commissioners as well as the DEQ.
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Conrad, that's a great question. So the DEQ and counties regulate different things. So DEQ regulates water quality, wildlife, all of those environmental issues. Counties regulate public health and safety. And so particularly, again, I can speak to the instance in Sheridan County. There's a county road that this particular gravel mine wanted to use that has sort of a dip before it gets to a state highway. And there was a major concern about safety of these big, the side dump trucks that you see in your gravel mines, and that they would come up and they often wouldn't stop at that state highway. And they'd run right up and there would be an issue going onto that state highway. That's a county issue. It relates to, again, the flow of traffic within that county and the use of that county road. That's not a DEQ issue.
Follow up? Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Ms. Anderson, let me play it differently. County says yes, DEQ says no.
And Mr. Chairman, DEQ actually doesn't really have a right to say no to an LMO.
The state?
Again, there's not a permit, provided the company files the paperwork, posts the bond, that's it. So there's, yeah, so DEQ doesn't really say no to an LMO.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions?
Just a quick follow-up. You kind of brushed over lightly the concept of the individual's rights with their land. And you weighed in more with the government rights. Why did you do that?
Ms. Anderson?
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, our organization, of course, and it's interesting, we represented recently a group of landowner neighbors to a gravel mine, and where the gravel mine is actually located on a member of ours land as well. So, you know, we have to, I think what the counties try and do, and what my county I think has done very well, is balance those rights, right? So you have the right of the landowner to develop their land, but you also have comprehensive planning and zoning to protect the entire rights of everyone in the county, and to understand, again, traffic, noise, light. These are real impacts to people that live near these operations, and county regulations, and not all counties have comprehensive zoning. As Mr. Riemann said, this only applies in counties that have elected to do that, like my county, where they, again, have balanced the rights of individual landowners with the rights of everyone else living within that county. And so it's, you know, and again, landowners don't have unfettered rights to do whatever they want with their land when there is comprehensive zoning. Zoning takes some of those rights away. That is what zoning does. But it does it in a way that we think is effective for everyone else in the county.
Other questions? Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you.
So others? We're still on public testimony on limited mining operations amendments.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Kelly Little. I'm with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. We appreciate DEQ and Mr. Whitland's cooperation and their clarity and transparency with our members as they developed this legislation, and they were open to feedback throughout the entire process from our members. So we appreciate that. We do support this bill, and we support some of the different changes in particular related to the increase in the bond rates. You know, that will affect our members. However, we understand the need to ensure that the state is held harmless if reclamation were to fall to the state. We also support the adjusted timing for release of the bond for LMOs from the current 5-year requirement to 2 years after successful reclamation has been proven. I just want to quickly touch on the county language topic. We don't have any, you know, we support private property rights, and we don't have any particular opinion on the debate that's being held here. However, I would ask that the committee consider all of the changes that are being made by this proposed legislation, and whether the debate that's being held, which is a very valid debate, would possibly risk the important changes that are needed to be made here, and whether that could be a separate discussion, as Mr. Riemann stated. And with that, you know, we believe that this is a good piece of legislation, and we would just ask that the committee favorably consider it with the proposed amendments. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the DEQ amendments that they offered and just make specific note of your position on those amendments. Are those all things you support, or do you have any concerns with what they have offered?
Mr. Chairman.
Little.
Senator Ellis, yes, we support those language changes. We've discussed that with DEQ, and they've been very clear on what those would do.
Okay. Other questions for Ms. Little for Associated General Contractors? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Little. Mr. Detai.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Travis Detai with the Wyoming Mining Association. And I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle. I was out when you offered public comment for the geological survey. I just wanted to start with saying we really appreciate the work that Director Campbell and the geological survey are doing there. We appreciate your support for them, and we would hope that would continue. They do great work. You know, we've got a lot of interest in exploration in the state right now for these critical minerals, for other things that we need. And I would come back to something that I say to this committee all often, is that production is revenue. We are reliant on our mineral industry, and production is revenue, and we need to continue to grow that mining portfolio. And that's what and the work that Director Campbell and her team are doing, you know, to help that exploration so that we can eventually spin it into production is critical. So we would ask you to continue your support for her and her work as well. Which leads me into my next point, and the reason that we have interest in this bill is, again, production is revenue. And we believe that some of the changes and right off front, we support the changes suggested by the DEQ. We support, where we're going on this, because this will allow, it will allow us to get into production and allow us to get into production a little bit quicker and start generating some revenue, not only for companies, but for the state on some of those items like gold, like rare earths, and like, other critical minerals. So that is our position in supporting the bill. I would respect the position of my friend from the county commissioners. This is a good bill. We want to see it move forward. And if that language could come out so that we could advance this bill and then be addressed at another time in another venue, we would appreciate that, and we'd be involved in that discussion. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we support the bill and we would hope you'd move it forward.
Questions for Mr. Detai? Questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public comment? Anyone else online? Okay. Anyone else in the room? Last chance. Okay. Brian, does the committee have a copy of the letter from the regulatory task force? Was that circulated to the committee?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I believe it was sent to the committee electronically. I think it was part of the meeting materials that were sent out. Or I think it may only be electronic.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to resend that letter right now to the committee if.
Okay, if Brian, if you could do that, I guess I would ask that we include this as part of the meeting minutes.
Yep, and Mr. Chairman, these are part of the meeting materials already. So.
Okay. All right, so I don't need to read this into the record.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Okay, thank you. I really didn't want to read to the committee. But in general, the position of the regulatory reduction task force is to support this bill. They also support the amendment on the county commissioners not being able to prohibit mining operations. And I will let you read this on your own, committee. So I know all of you can read. And that, but I wanted to make sure we included that in the record. So with that, I will close public testimony. Oh, co-chair. With that, I will close public testimony. Committee. Moved by Larson, seconded by Lawley. Okay, so with that, we will go through the bill. Page 1. Okay, with great trepidation, page 2. Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, can I just move all of the DEQ amendments at one time?
You can do that if that's your motion.
I move that we approve all the DEQ suggested amendments.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Ellis, and Representative Conrad beat you to the punch on being second. Okay, so with that, all in favor of including all of the recommended DEQ amendments as offered in their written summary, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, those amendments are adopted. Okay, so page 2, Representative Larson.
I'd like to move the amendments presented by the Commissioners Association.
Second.
Okay, moved by Larson, seconded by Lawley. Now, what are you moving?
Mr. Chairman, page 2, lines 7 through 13, delete entirely, and page 3, lines 19 through 22, delete the inserted language.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone understands what we're saying. Okay, okay, would you repeat that, please, Representative?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Page 2, lines 7 through 13, delete entirely. Page 3, lines 19 through 22, delete the inserted language.
So, committee, the amendment is to delete the language concerning county commissioners and mining and that discussion that we've spent the last hour on.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, discussion. Go ahead, Representative or Senator Ellis. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be a no on the motion. When I have been reading these, I do think our statutes delineate between regular mining operations versus those that are limited. I could very much see a situation where a county might deny a permit and say, well, our limitation only applies to permanent mining operations, or not the limited ones. As I look at it, I do think there's a little ambiguity. So I think leaving the language in there as requested by the DEQ provides more clarity of what we mean. So I understand Mr. Ryman and the county commissioner's concern, but when I study this and look at it, I do see the ambiguity. So I think this is a bit of a belt and suspenders so that we're not clear on, or unclear on our intent. So I'll be a no on the amendment.
Brian, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just want to clarify that the changes on page 2, lines 7 and 13, and then page 3, lines 19 and 22, were requested to be inserted by Chairman Docksetter, not DEQ. So I just wanted to clarify that, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies.
No, that I was going to make that clarification also. So these were not DEQ's request. These are outside of that. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the motion because I do think it's two separate issues and two separate pieces of legislation to consider. I think what DEQ brought forward is a self-contained proposal, which is debatable. And I think there's upside and downside to it. We didn't focus much of the debate on that. We focused most of our debate on the additional information, which again, I think is ripe for a personal bill, is again a debatable issue where I'm sure there is quite a bit of passion on both sides. I don't want to see the focus taken away from the original legislation that DEQ was requesting related to limited mining operations and have the focus shift specifically to what is currently an issue within Teton County, whether there's merit to it or not. I think it's more appropriate for us as a committee to be putting forward legislation on behalf of the agencies that report to us that they request and be considering that on their own merits. So I'll be an aye.
Okay. Other comments on the amendment? Any other comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, obviously I seconded the motion, so I do support it, but I really, we didn't have time to really digest the Attorney General opinion we were given, but I think it's very helpful to understand how the general authority and statute for counties, things they've been prohibited of doing, what they can do, creates kind of a framework in which there's a process to work through things because they do have some authority in this area because of zoning and regulation of zoning and some other things. So it's a process that plays out and there are remedies in that process. And that hasn't been achieved yet. We haven't even reached those points, and to kind of come in and tinker with legislation when in the midst of what we're doing in a larger part with this bill, again, just seems a little out of order to me. And I would prefer us to have those really good discussions and weigh that. Maybe there is a need for this kind of a provision, but I don't think we can have the kind of discussion that's appropriate and helpful for someone like me. Again, this opinion is very interesting and I think displays kind of the complexities that maybe we don't see sitting at this table this morning. So again, that's why I support taking it out and as having I'm happy to have the conversation separately, individually, because I do think it's important.
Okay. Mr. Co-Chair, I think you want to make some comments.
Good discussion this morning. I stand against the amendment because ultimately, whether it is being labeled as one particular area or not, the overall concept of the property right still prevails for me, and that's why I brought it forward. I sense that we're overriding someone's right to do something on their own land within the realms and within the property lines of their own property, and we're stepping on that and simply saying, no, the government prevails over your own property. It's a property right issue with me, and that's why I will oppose the amendment.
Okay. Other comments? We're discussing the proposed amendment. Question being called. I'm going to ask for a show of hands on this because we're going to end up there anyway. So all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, the amendment is not adopted. Okay. Page Okay, that takes us over to page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. 9. Page 10. 11. Committee? Question being called. We are voting on 24 LSO 0058 version 0.8 limited mining operations amendments. Tanner, if you'd please call the roll.
Senator Cooper. Senator Ellis. Senator Jones excused. Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Representative Banks excused. Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Heiner. Representative Knapp. Representative Larson. Representative Lawley. Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Co-chairman Dockstader.
Aye.
Co-chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 aye, 1 no, and 2 excused.
Okay, thank you, Tanner. So at this point, we're going to take a brief break until 11:15. I believe Senator Doc, well, before we do, Mr. Wentland, would you come up, please? We'll just hold on that break for a minute. This will only take 30 to 60 seconds. And Mr. Wentland, you offered a quick update on the source material amendments.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just for thank you, and for the committee. Both staff positions were hired in August. We have met with the NRC both virtually and had an on-site since that time. Those meetings were held. We have run 3 chapters through the advisory board earlier in September. We have 3 more chapters coming in December out of the 9. We are on track, on schedule, on budget.
Okay, thank you. And that was for the agreement state status for byproduct source material. Let's just say thorium coming out of the rare earths mines that we have to address. So thank you very much. And the hard work done by the department is greatly appreciated. That really helps Wyoming in the future. Thank you. So with that, let's take a break until 1:15, maybe a little.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry,
for
go
those
ahead.
committee, I'm going to excuse myself at this point. Appreciate your patience. My company is doing all the live broadcasts down at War Memorial of the state championship football games. I got to go to work with my other hat on, but there's one in particular that I want to attend at 3 o'clock that involves Cody and Star Valley. So I'm leaving. Thank you.
Okay. Have a safe trip, Senator. Back to order. I apologize for the Appropriations Committee 10 minutes. And for those of you who don't understand, that is a joke. Appropriations will take a 10-minute break that lasts 45 minutes. So with that, we'll proceed. I'm going to try to go back into order somewhat. And I think the next one is maybe a little less controversial, which is mining operations blasting requirements. So Director, your surrogate is gone, I guess.
Still on break.
So
I know how this works.
and Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to walk the committee through the bill as well.
Okay, so we're on limited mining operations blasting requirements.
Yep.
This was a request from DEQ. There you go. You've been saved, Director. Mr. Wentland, I just barely beat you into the room. So no apologies necessary. So I'm going to let staff take us through this bill. I think we just wanted time am I correct, Brian, from the last meeting to think about this a little bit? I had some questions that have been resolved. So I think this is pretty finalized unless there are amendments made now. So Brian, if you would take us through the bill, please.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, you should have draft 0.6 in front of you. This is 12-03 in the meeting materials. The committee considered this bill draft in July. There were just a couple of changes from the July meeting that were made, and then a couple of outstanding items that I'll discuss after going through the bill. So starting on page 3, line 9, this specifies a new requirement for limited mining operations, which are subject to the rules governing the use of explosives that are provided in this bill draft. The change on page 3, line 16, this is a change from the July meeting and just clarifies that the Environmental Quality Council can suspend or modify requirements, but not the blasting requirements that are introduced in this bill draft. So that's a conforming amendment. On page 4, line 11, in the annual report that an operator conducting limited mining operations submits, the report must include information about the blasting plan and any other information on the use of explosives that are required by rule. Then page 4, line 18, this requires the Environmental Quality Council, upon recommendation from the administrator and the director, to establish rules governing the use of explosives at new and existing non-coal surface mining operations. And then page 5 includes information about what those rules must include. So first, standards and procedures to ensure that explosives are used only in accordance with state and federal law. Incorporate applicable standards from the International Fire Code and the National Fire Protection Association Explosives Material Code. The staff comment on page 5 is a carryover from July. Then moving on to page 6, line 2, the rules must include requirements for the operator to maintain at least 3 years of records and logs regarding blast location, pattern, and depth of drill holes, the amount of explosives that are used, and the order and length of delay of each blast. Page 6, line 9 establishes the rules must establish the types of explosives and detonation equipment to be used as to prevent injury to persons, damage to public and private property, adverse impacts on any underground mine. And then page 6, line 21, this was a direction from July, adverse impacts on any water source or water resource. And then finally, the rules must require that all blasting operations be conducted and trained by competent persons as certified by the administrator. Page 7, line 19 and 3511-406, which concerns mining plans. The mining plan must include a blasting plan that outlines the procedures and standards by which the operator of a non-coal surface mine will comply with. On page 8, line 7, this is a section that concerns duties of operators and would require an operator pursuant to a mining permitted mining plan to comply with the blasting plan. Page 8, line 13 authorizes one full-time equivalent position for DEQ for the next fiscal biennium for purposes of implementing this act. Then page 8, line 22 appropriates just over $500,000 from the general fund to the department for purposes of funding that position. The standard appropriation language follows. And then in light of the committee's discussion in July, the staff comment provides alternate language really getting at the intent of the legislature for the next fiscal biennium to make clear that $100,000, which were identified as one-time costs, would not be included in the department's budget request for the next fiscal biennium. With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for questions.
Committee questions for staff?
And Mr. Chairman, I was remiss in one matter. There is information for the committee in your e-notebook and your paper packets concerning there was a question at the last meeting regarding a corporation by reference. And so information was provided to the committee in response to that.
Thank you, Brian. I was going to mention that. Okay. Mr. Wentland, Director, comments? We've walked through the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Kyle Wentland, Administrator of Land Quality of DEQ. Mr. Chairman, with regard to the first staff comment on back on page 5, we have no preference on this. If I would leave that possibly to the committee on their preference. And in regard to the staff comment on page 9, we have talked to our comptroller, and at this point in time, both sets of language get us to the same place. We're comfortable, and I believe it would be committee preference.
Any questions for the department? Okay. All right. With that, I will go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Mr. Wentland and Director Parfit, sorry. Help me understand why the additional one person is necessary.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Conrad, for a couple reasons, we're seeing a pretty big increase in the non-coal sector. We've got the potential gold operation coming in west of Cheyenne. We've got deep bentonite in the Bighorn Basin now, that is requiring some fairly extensive non-coal shooting. We're seeing a lot more in the quarry sector as well. We're also, our coal program is full. We have a lot going on with the coal program. Now we have a lot going on with the non-coal program in this sector, which is a good thing for the state because it says we're getting diversity in our mineral backing. But that also, the demand for just teaching the classes, we're hitting class sizes now in excess of 30, 35 people. We just had one in Gillette here. We had 20 and we had 17 people taking the exam out of those 20. It's just the demand is there for us for this additional FTE at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman,
please,
Representative Conrad, I would also just add that this is a new activity for the agency. We haven't been running a program for blasting for non-coal. It's been for the coal program only. And so it's an additional activity.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe this was discussed in the last meeting, but I just want a little bit of a refresher. Minus the $100,000 in one-time costs, this is a pretty high paid position. Can you just go over why that is?
Mr. Wentland?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yeah, there are specific requirements that you have to do to even be able to teach these classes. And you need somebody that's experienced, especially if we get into a complaint situation and you're evaluating seismograph and particle velocities and air blast. These are highly technical skill sets and they are not easy to come by.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. With that, I will open for public comment on mining operations, blasting requirements.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, this is Kelly Little with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. I'll be pretty brief here. Although this bill requires more stringent record keeping, training, and reporting requirements, our members are supporting this bill because of the added clarity and protection from liability that this legislation would offer. And we support the bill, and I will stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Little? Questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Little. Mr.
M-
Detai.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Travis Detai, Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. And before I get to my dynamic testimony, if the committee chairman would indulge me for a minute, I'd like to thank Representative Conrad this morning for his recommendation of or his recognition of our veterans on Veterans Day tomorrow. Being a veteran of the United States Air Force, I think he must have slipped his mind that today, November 10th, is the 248th birthday of the United States Marine Corps. And so I will look forward during the break to Representative Conrad wishing me a happy birthday out in the hallway. So
That was a conscious omission.
I kind of figured. Mr. Chairman, we support the bill.
Okay. And I will let the various service members fight this out in the hallway. Okay, thank you, Mr. Detai. Any other public comment? Anyone online? Okay, with that, I will close public comment.
Move the bill.
Moved by Conrad, seconded by Lawley. Okay. So discussion on the bill, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Okay. With page 5, as chairman, I cannot make a motion. Oh, Representative Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend to utilize the alternate language for the appropriation pursuant to the staff comment.
So just to be clear, page 5, which alternate language? I'm sorry,
No worries. Oh, I'm sorry. That was on page 9. I was behind. On page 5, I won't make a motion. I don't know that I care either. Do you want a motion to discuss?
Well, I can't, as chairing, I can't make the motion. What I would say is that we not include a specific addition based on staff's memo. We just stay silent on the addition. So leave it as is.
Yeah.
To address staff comment. So what we're looking at is that on page 5, line 5, leave that as specified, as already written.
Right.
Make no amendment.
Yeah,
Okay.
no amendment on that one. I thought we were on the next one. My apologies.
Okay, thanks. I'll get to you in just a moment. Okay, page 6. Page 7. 7. Okay, I will offer an amendment on page 7, item Romanet 6. On the requirements of what's in the report, any unfired or undetonated, unrecovered explosives left in site. That happens on occasion if you're blasting. And I think people need to know about that. I've had that experience a couple times. Okay, it would be Romanet 6 as a requirement in the report, any undetonated and unrecovered explosives. Meaning there's live explosives left there that are not recoverable. You look quizzitive, Brian.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator.
I'll second it, but I think you might need to give Brian flexibility to conform the language to the way the paragraph is written up. above.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Second.
So Mr. Chairman, is your intent to the items on page 7 establish a type of explosives and detonation equipment to be used so as to prevent undetonated and unrecovered explosives? Is that your intention, or do you want those to be reported in
just reported
in the annual report? Then Mr. Chairman, I think
Yes.
that would go probably best on page 4 in lines 11 through 14.
Okay, that's acceptable. So, well, okay. Second. So I would ask the department to come up. Do you have any comments on that proposed amendment?
Mr. Chairman, my comment to that is when we develop the rules we'll develop the non-coal rules very similar to the coal rules. in their shot report, that's already reported.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that the language is needed in statute. Because it will be addressed in rule in the standard reporting form that they'll file with us. And that's kept for the 3 years.
All right. So if it's okay with my second, then I will withdraw that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wetland. So no such amendment, Brian. Okay, so we are on to page 7, page 8, page 9.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
All right, now I'll make the motion that I was making last time at the wrong place. And I move to replace paragraph B, which is beginning on page 8, line 22, with the alternative language provided in the staff comment at the bottom of page 9, so that there is appropriate clarity about $100,000 being a one-time request and the continuing budget being the $400,000.
Seconded by Larson. Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Okay, question on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Amendment is adopted. And finally, on page 10. Okay, committee? Yes, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to make a motion, but I just think these effective dates are really goofy. That we have to say that they take immediate effect. That allows the department to do rulemaking, but they really don't take effect until July 1st. I just think we're deviating from just having a clean, this shall take effect July 1st, 2024. I'm not going to make a motion, but it's all over the place with these bill of drafts, it seems.
Okay, okay, hang on a minute. Okay, would you explain your comments, please, for the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when we have bills, usually they say the act shall take effect July 1st, 2024. I think it used to be presumed that if an agency needed to start rulemaking, that they could start the rulemaking, but those wouldn't take effect until after July 1st. We've started doing this thing though, where agencies say, well, we can't start doing rulemaking until the act takes effect in July 1st. So now we have these effective dates that say they take immediate effect they allow the agency to do rulemaking, and then the act takes effect July 1st. Okay. It's just a thing that I've just been noticing. The legislature's kind of all over the place on this between committees. My preference is we just say July 1st, and then agencies know that they can start rulemaking, but that can't take effect until after July 1st. But I'm not going to make a motion because I think that what we're looking at, all these bills are the same. It's an interesting thing that we do in the legislature.
Okay, thank you. Brian, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I have a comment. I would just note two things with this. I mean, first, a split effective date would give department, a clear signal that they can start the rulemaking authority. The second observation I'd offer is, it maybe obviates the possibility of a procedural challenge for rules that commenced the rulemaking process before July 1 of a particular year. Okay. That would just be what I would offer. Mr. Chairman, I think that, the selection of a effective date certainly within the committee's purview.
So, Brian, if my recollection serves me right, also, these started coming out of appropriations as a way to give the departments money up front where they needed funding for the rulemaking so that they could expend that ahead of the effective date.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm familiar with certain appropriations taking effect immediately and say the budget bill. I think that practice may have started before I showed up.
All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, committee? Question being called. We are voting on 24 LSO 0073 mining operations blasting requirements. Tanner, would you please call the roll?
Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Ellis. Senator Jones excused. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Banks excused. Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Heiner. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson. Aye. Representative Lawley. Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Co-chairman Dockstader.
Excused.
Co-chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 aye and 3 excused.
Okay, thank you. So Representative Comrade, you may be jumping ahead of the order here.
I don't want to be behind.
That's debatable. Okay, I'm looking at the clock and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more bills to address. So just give me a minute here. I know that on 0072, there are going to be some suggested amendments and we need to look at that. Let's just jump into that one. Now, this is a reconsideration. Brian, you had a comment?
So, Mr. Chairman, pursuant to the rules, a vote for the committee to reconsider this would need to take place first.
Okay.
So, and Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to call the roll on that.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
So I think pursuant to the rules, though, unless they're adjusted for committees, which I don't know that they are, vote to reconsider then usually ends up with an immediate vote for reconsideration after the vote to reconsider takes place. Now, without any debate. And if we want to hear testimony on it, it's actually, I think, more appropriately in order for us to take all the testimony that would inform that vote ahead of time.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I think a little more flexible in committees than during session. The practice that I've encountered has been a vote to reconsider basically opens the bill back up. At which point the committee could work the bill as if it were on the committee's desk.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that.
So it Representative Lawley, a question or? No, we don't need a motion. We will need a vote.
Yep.
To reconsider. So we are voting on reconsideration of 24 LSO 0072 Geologic Sequestration Unitization Amendments for the purpose of considering proposed amendments that came out of the Regulatory Reduction Task Force.
Yep. Senator
Okay.
Cooper.
Please call the roll.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Ellis. Senator Jones excused. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Banks excused. Representative Conrad. Representative Heiner. Representative Knapp. Representative Larson. Representative Lawley. Representative Tarver. Representative Western. Co-chairman Dockstader excused. Chairman Burkhart. Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we are reopening 24 LSO 0072 for the consideration of proposed amendments. And we have two. We have an original one proposed through the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, and we have a analysis of that done by the department, PAW, Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which better clarifies it. So we have two competing amendments. So I'll ask the department, I don't know the procedure here. Do you wish to withdraw that original amendment in favor of the one you've helped prepare?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we would like to
Okay.
withdraw that. initially.
So for the committee, the original amendment you received was a one-pager that had just a few changes in wording. The new one, I believe you have copies of it, which is a little different wording, but achieves the same effect and clarification. And that is was presented as mine listed as discussion draft 3511-313. So with that, in as much as the request on that original amendment's withdrawn, we will take this one. For everyone, that's the one we are discussing. I know this is confusing as all get out, but
Mr. Chairman, I can't find it, a hard copy or online.
okay. Do we have, Brian, do we have enough hard copies of this? Is it online? Director, Mr. Obermueller? Do we have hard copies of this? Okay. Can we get copies printed for the committee? We'll take a short break, or if you have enough copies to circulate. Okay, so we'll just kind of stand at ease for a few minutes until everybody gets a copy of that. I thought they went out. I guess I was wrong. That's what I get for thinking. And Director, I'm correct. This is the one you wish to discuss.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. So for the people who are watching on Zoom, yes, we are confused momentarily. So, and we will discuss these recommended changes in a little bit of detail. So just hold for a minute, Director, unless.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I might, since we have this break, just make a statement about the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. So there are 4 items that are being asked to move by the Regulatory Reduction Task Force to come to the Minerals Committee. And I thought I would just outline those while we're waiting here.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's good use of the time.
So there are 4 things that will be coming to this being asked to come to the Minerals Committee. The first is this one on the carbon sequestration amendments. But there are also 2 bills. One would be a regulatory restrictions bill, which is talking about how we address provisions and rules that are more stringent than the federal government.
And we will take that one up probably this after lunch.
Yes. And then the second one is the statute of limitations proposed bill. And then the last thing is that we will be looking at public notices and converting our public notices to an electronic form. And we have a process that we have initiated on that. We don't have a draft bill, but it's one that we will be bringing to the Minerals Committee probably next year.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. I only have 3 bills, so that will.
And Mr. Chairman, while those are being handed out, you should have an electronic copy in your inbox as well.
Okay. Okay. Heather, thank you very much. Okay, so with that, Director, proceed. Let's see, I got to find the original bill here. Okay, geologic sequestration, unitization amendments. 0072. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just point out with me here is Jennifer Zigman. She's the administrator of the Water Quality Division. So if there are any specific questions around carbon sequestration, she will be able to answer those. So when we were talking to the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, we identified a concern where we were talking about in the current statute where the department may issue a draft permit, and we don't issue draft permits, we issue final permits. And so it was just a clarification so that we would just say that we would be issuing a permit authorizing sequestration, and then having further conversations with the Oil and Gas Commission and the Petroleum Association. We further refined that to what I think all agree is appropriate language moving forward. And so the amendment would be that the department may issue a permit authorizing, and then you have number 1 and 2. The first thing would be a construction permit of an injection well. And the idea there is that there's a single permit that gets issued. It's in 2 parts. The first is to construct the well, gather additional information. And then the second part of it is the applicant or the permit holder would then come back to the agency for the second half of that, which is the actual authority then to inject the CO2. And that happens after the unitization. We wanted to be clear that you can do the construction of the well prior to having the unitization order from the Oil and Gas Commission, but you could not begin injection until after you had that in place. So that just clarifies that. And then there was another provision in 315 that talked about the issuance of a permit. And so there was some clarification on that. But that's really the essence of the amendments here. The amendments on 315 and 316, I'll leave to the Oil and Gas Commission and the PAW to discuss, because that really gets into the unitization part, which the DEQ really doesn't have a role in that.
Okay. All right. Questions for the department? Okay. All right. Thank you. So, let's see. Mr. Crowpatch, I guess I'll call you up to talk about 315, 316. Yeah. I want to see you for a minute, Ms. Anderson, if you would, please. Do you have a copy of this amendment? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. You looked quizzical, and I just wanted to make sure you had adequate information if you wish to comment. Okay. So, Director Crowpatch, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Crowpatch. I'm the supervisor for the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission. I will maybe make mention on 313 in that part 2 for sequestration, the authorization to inject, as Director Parfit mentioned. It does say if required in there, and that was the part that we actually wanted added to that section, because there are scenarios where unitization would not be required. And if that's not in there, then, you know, we wanted the ability to just authorize from the commission. We don't need unitization. Go ahead. You can issue your authorization to inject without having some other further explanation or hearing by the commission on unitization. So we added that part. I think the parts that PAW asked for in 315 and 316 just make it clear what on that first part on 315, copy of any permit, draft permit, the permit or is crossed out, but it's copy of any draft permit or permit issued by the department allowing geologic sequestration or any application. So it just clarifies the commission can work with data related to a draft permit that got submitted, even the application for a permit for sequestration. The commission could use that information to determine unitization. And so it just kind of clarifies the information there that can be allowed. And then for part 316, it just reads that the Oil and Gas Commission can rely on the injection permit issued by the department to satisfy the requirements. Those requirements were to really what operations could be contemplated in the plan of unit operations. If you recall, in the original language, it said environmental compliance with environmental conditions, and we changed it in the previous changes that were made to class 6 permit conditions and any other environmental requirements. And so this just clarifies that the permit issued by the department or the DEQ will be what is used by the commission to determine what operations can be allowed in the unit operating plan.
Questions for Director Crowpatch? Any questions? Okay, thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I will open for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermueller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. And just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, since it's all technical, I just wanted to back up for a second and remind the committee. First of all, the changes that we requested, we probably would, we were fine with the bill as the committee passed back in July. We may have requested some amendments when it got to the session. The reconsideration came from the Regulatory Reduction Task Force. And so once, and then we noticed that unintentionally on their part, that language was incorrect. And I can explain that. Mr. Fuller asked me about removing the word permit draft in some places, but keeping it in the other place. And I can explain that in a second. But since it was being reopened, we thought take the opportunity to continue to fix this bill from the past bill back in July.
Mr. Obermuller, if I might interrupt for a moment.
Mhm.
So the Regulatory Task Force recommended a separate bill that does what these amendments do. I felt instead of having another bill, we would just reopen this, add them in because they did fit, rather than having another separate bill. So that's the reason for the reconsideration and these amendments, was to avoid another bill out there that we would have to address. So thank you. Please proceed.
So real briefly then, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. Just a couple of things to clarify in your mind as you move this forward. With respect to the draft permit, and as Director Parfit pointed out, they don't issue draft permits. So the difference there in the posted amendment that you all had in front of you prior is you have to change the title of the bill and all that in order to bring in 313. That wasn't part of your original bill. So all of 313 is new. And so that all that conforming stuff up above is why that's there. 313, the director is absolutely right. They don't issue a draft permit. They issue a permit. So that part is understandable. Again, going off of the amendment that's posted for you. Below that, where they start changing page 4, line 3, that's referring to the bill you passed. That's not 313 anymore. That goes back into 315. 315 is the part of the application of the requirements of the application for unitization. And there are, in fact, draft permits there. In fact, the term draft permit is in the DEQ's rules like 17 times or whatever. Draft permits exist. It's just that the DEQ doesn't issue those. So for example, when a permit goes out to public comment, that's a draft permit. It's just that it hasn't been issued. So an applicant, there's two parts of this. You have to do all of the environmental requirements that DEQ does, right? And then you also have to get the unitization order from the OGCC. And an operator, I could go tomorrow and just file a unitization order with OGCC with no permit or a draft permit or any of that from DEQ. And we don't want to limit the ability of people to go to OGCC and try to start getting unitization. It's just that they're not going to get it until these things have to work in tandem. So that's what that's about. And the rest of the stuff that we've requested, both in 313, 315, and 316 are all sort of built in suspenders to make sure that works. And that the two agencies are working in tandem along with the applicant to move the process forward. So the director mentioned that there's one permit with two parts. So in general, an applicant will get the permit, the class 6 permit from DEQ, but they cannot inject CO2 until they have a unitization order. So what we're really clarifying here is what happens in that intervening space. You have the DEQ's approval, you don't have a unitization order. What can you do in that part? It's already implied under the bill you already passed, but it's not explicit. And so that's what this language does. You can construct a well, you can do those sorts of things as long as you have a agreement with the landowner, you've met all the other legal requirements. You can go do that while you're working with Supervisor Kropatch and his team on getting a unitization order. So forgive me if you already all knew all that. I just wanted to back up a little bit and remind the committee what that was. So the rest of it, I think, has already been explained by Supervisor Kropatch, Director Parfit. So I'm happy to answer any other questions on it if you would like me to, but I don't think I need to repeat what they've said.
No. Questions for Mr. Obermuller? Questions? Okay, I guess not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So thank you. Just for the committee, just to remind you, with this bill that we passed and now reopened, you have to remember that this requires DEQ and OCGG or OGCC working together. They have different roles, but they have to be combined to do this. So just, that's why this might sound a little confusing and we go to different sections, but that's the reason. Mr. Obermuller, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to point out for the committee, I know you already know this, but, and I apologize for the confusion of not getting a copy out to you all. The draft that we put together did not include all of that stuff in the beginning of the actual posted amendment, the changing the title, all that kind of stuff. So you do have to allow Mr. Fuller the ability to conform all that. Just, I think you knew that, but just in case.
We do know that. Okay. Other public comment? Any other public comment? Anyone online? Okay, with that, I will close public comment. Committee? Okay. Second, moved and seconded. So the main reason is to address the amendment. We've already been through this bill and it was passed, so we'll address the amendment as presented. And the copy you have. Representative Lawley, microphone, please.
Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, can we do this all in one?
Yes.
One swipe? Or do you
Yes.
want to do it individually? Because I would make a motion to adopt this amendment here, but my understanding is there's some conforming amendments on the other page we also need to include.
Yes. So the motion on the amendment is to adopt the amendment as presented and allow staff to conform as necessary.
Yes.
So what's that?
I'll second.
I think it was already seconded. I think Senator Rothfuss seconded it. I thought, or Cooper, one of you? I thought I heard someone down here. Okay. Okay, then it's Conrad. Yeah, okay. It's getting to be a long day on a Friday afternoon, morning still, sorry. So this is as the amendment as was presented in writing by Department of Environmental Quality. I just want to make sure we're all dealing with the same amendment. It starts at the top 35-11-313. Okay. All right. Question on the amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, so now we're voting on 24 LS. Well, okay, committee, question being called. We're voting on 24 LSO 0072 geologic sequestration unitization amendments as amended. Please call the roll.
Senator Cooper. Senator Ellis. Senator Jones excused, Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Representative Banks excused, Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Heiner. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Lawley.
Aye.
Representative Tarver.
Aye.
Representative Western.
Aye.
Co-chairman Dockstader excused, Chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 aye and 3 excused.
Okay, thank you. So that bill as amended is adopted. Next one for our consideration is 24 LSO 0153. And because Representative Conrad serves on the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, we'll ask him to present this one, which he tried to do before, and now we'll let him do it. Okay, Representative Conrad, proceed.
Chairman Burkhart, members of the committee, it's good to see you again. I'd like to begin addressing as The chairman has already denoted here a proposed bill. As you can see, I've been prefacing that description of the bill. I just want to share with you just a brief background on where this came from. Unlike our neighboring states, Wyoming currently lacks a specific statute of limitations for enforcement actions by the State Department of Environmental Quality under any delegated environmental regulatory program. As a general principle, I think we all know that a statute of limitations in this case prescribes a period of time within which a plaintiff must assert a claim for relief for a violation of the law. After that applicable period of time has passed, the plaintiff can no longer file suit for that claim. Now, statutes of limitations really are generally intended to promote three things. The first one being the prompt assertion of the claim, the second one being a prevention of fraud, and the third being the efficient judicial administration. It's interesting that several of our states neighboring Wyoming have statutes of limitations specific to environmental enforcement actions. Colorado, Idaho, Montana, and Utah apply limitations from periods in the neighborhood between 18 months and to 5 years for such actions. I think it's clear, or more importantly, important to note that federal environmental laws do not include specific statutes of limitations for EPA enforcement actions. Rather, long-standing agency practice and court decisions have made clear that generally a 5-year statute of limitation period for civil fines, penalties, and forfeitures that start to run from the date of the violation applies to the EPA's enforcement of these laws. A most recent example of that, which you may be familiar of regarding waters of the United States, was the Sackett versus the EPA case in 2023. Not having clear limitations, in this case, statutes of limitations spelled out in the Wyoming statutes presents a great deal of uncertainty for regulated community members in Wyoming. Although Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Colorado do not provide clear legislation sideboards, or more importantly it defines how far an agency can go back assessing penalties and bringing forth penalties for such violations. Such statutes of limitations would be an incentive to the agency to be diligent in finding and moving forward with enforcement actions, specifically related to a certainty within the regulated community. I believe, as the bill will denote, adopting a statute of limitation would make a lot of sense in Wyoming. Specifically, the proposal of a limitation of 5 years from the effective date of this section to initiate an enforcement case or enforcement action for the violation, notwithstanding the previous Wyoming statute of 35-1170, as created in section 1 of that act. This bill, I believe, would enable the agency to proceed in an efficient manner to resolve compliance issues, provide certainty to participants, as well as provide additional time for negotiation of a settlement and implementing compliance measures. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand by for any questions.
Okay. Committee, questions? Senator Rothfuss.
Have there been any cases that have arisen where this has come into play, where we've had something that was 10 or 15 years old and somehow it became an enforcement case that raised this up to the onto the radar?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, there has, specifically in the Southwest Wyoming in the area around 10 years.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, are there any financial implications or challenges? I mean, I guess the question is, and I don't know the details of the case, so I can't judge the case, and it's probably better that we don't judge it based on a case. It's more about, is this in any way overwhelming our Department of Environmental Quality? On one hand, is it hurting business? On the other hand, I'm struggling to see a value of saying, well, if you got away with it for 5 years, you get away with it forever. I don't know what the intrinsic value is there, unless there were significant changes to the profile of raising capital, of insurability, of anything along those lines, based on having some timeline for indemnification. So I need to understand why this is worth doing, and I wonder what the regulatory task force heard.
Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator Rothfuss, I think there's a number of checks and balances, or more importantly, due diligence that are instilled within such a program. The one thing that creates collaboration between the respective businesses and or industrial users, as well as the Department of Environmental Quality. Specifically, it enables as denoted earlier, more importantly in the case, it allows the agency to conduct, obviously, their inspections or quarterly audits, et cetera, or maybe those are yearly audits, but it allows the actual industrial user as well as the Department of Environmental Quality to be assured of their compliance as it relates to regulatory matters. The challenge without such a regulatory sideboard in this case is that businesses can run for so many years and not understanding based on whatever reason that they're out of compliance. But with the inability to have those checks and balances, specifically as it relates to the Department of Environmental Quality coming in and auditing and specifically providing education, inspections, et cetera, at some frequency of time, an industrial person, more importantly, company would never know they're out of compliance for whatever reasons. There's no attempt in this bill to avoid such, in this case, adherence to the law. It's not a 5-year, hey, we're done, we can work, we hid that for 5 years, not at all.
Follow up?
That's not the intent, but does it do that is what I'm trying to get at. I understand the intent that you describe, which I think is a worthwhile intent of I've been doing my best. I've been engaged with DEQ and we've checked all of our boxes and didn't find out until some period of time, oh, there was a non-compliance a number of years ago, adding on penalties. So all of that scenario, I think, makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate that. What about the intentional bad actor that knows they were out of compliance and just needs to, clock out 5 years if this were in place? Would this obviate something after 5 years, even if it was effectively an intentionally bad action, a known bad action, or a known lack of compliance? Because as I read it, unless I'm missing something, it seems to make that go away after 5 years also.
Representative Conrad.
Jim Burkhardt, thank you. Senator Rothis, I don't know if there's any legislation or law that we can eliminate the bad actor. I mean, we can do our best to confine that, but I can share with you the industrial users, specifically in the mining industry in the state of Wyoming, are doing everything possible to be the leaders in environmental compliance. So to that question, I guess I would refer to my cohorts, in this case, the Wyoming DEQ, for their perspective on that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I don't mean, I don't mean to imply otherwise. We write regulations for two purposes: to enable good actors to succeed and to make sure that bad actors don't. I'm trying to get to the make sure bad actors don't side of it. And I feel like this is achieving one side, but might not be addressing the other. Is that something that was considered or contemplated or discussed, or was it just focusing on the good actors? Good actors don't need to be regulated if they're doing everything perfectly to begin with, practically. We have to focus on both sides of that. So was that part of the discussion, or is this something that maybe we should explore with DEQ?
Representative Conrad.
Jim Burkhardt, Senator Rothis, the intent was to ensure that it's a collaborative approach, specifically as it relates to the DEQ, not speaking on behalf of them, but that promotes their awareness, their vigilance, their education, and their inspections, such that they're conducting those with regularity that will enable them to find, for lack of a better word, the bad actors, but also educating the good actors. So in this case, no, that was a part of the conversation as we built this draft, ensuring that it was not an attempt to, as an example, Senator Rothis, if that was a case, I guess the timing of the duration could be even reduced, right? So we're looking at a compromise between 2 years and infinity that allows qualifying, or more importantly, compliance in a measurable fashion. And we came up with the value of 5 years. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but okay, that's my attempt.
I'll stop for now. Thanks.
Okay. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share my colleagues' concerns because we got to thread the needle correctly. And in my practice, I definitely have worked with clients who have purchased assets from other operators where they were sloppy operators, there were problems. And so then you have a new good actor, and, be it a federal agency or the state of Wyoming, somebody wants to be made whole. And so my concern is that if we, have this very strict 5-year limit, you've got a new good actor who comes on board, they're stuck with all the mess of the enforcement. and there's no looking back or ability to get to the bad actor who left, wasn't in compliance. So and that's my concern, is I don't know that this quite threads the needle. And so I don't know if that was discussed during the regulatory task force. But I appreciate where this is coming from. I certainly understand the need, but I feel bad for those clients that they get stuck with having to pay for and be responsible for some really bad things that, their predecessors were engaged in.
Representative Conrad.
Sharon Burkhart, Senator Ellis, it's a great question. And for clarification, specifically, the bill was not heard at Regulatory Reduction Task Force. Thus, that's why it's here today. So to speak on behalf of that task force, which I belong to, would be unfair. But to your question specifically, I understand, and to address those issues where a company comes in and buys another asset, those are the responsibility of the acquiring company to ensure their due diligence is carried out fully. And therefore, that's the best checks and balance we have in that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Just to follow up, I can tell you, like, sometimes you do that due diligence and you find things. It just happens. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I again share some of the same concerns. And we've actually added, I think Senator Ellis added another component of as assets are transferred, and that creates some potential confusion and about how we obviously any liability passes on unless it's not in the contract. So I want to just look at some language here, because I think that some of these concerns emanate for me in the language suspected violation. Because we also, I think, is more Senator Roth's concern about fraud and hiding violations. And so when, as a matter of practicality on statute of limitations, when you get into this, when would the DEQ have had knowledge of a suspected violation? When did that occur? It sounds like that would be easy to determine, but it's not that easy, especially when you introduce this element of a potential fraud to hide either the violation itself or the extent of the violation. So I think the idea here to me is good, but is there some possibility on this language? I don't know how exactly this was developed, but my centers around this idea of suspected violation because it's triggering something. And so how is that determined in your mind? When does a potential violation rise to the level in your mind in the Department of Environmental Quality of a suspected violation? Because that's an important trigger.
Representative Conrad.
Sharon Burkhart, Representative Lawley, it's a great question. And I will address one thing prior to my answer to your question. Generally, when a company is acquired, there's that determination in terms of liability. So that is another protection, obviously, for the acquiring company to ensure that within the framework of that acquisition, that there is some responsibility, whether or not the due diligence is 100% correct or not. Now, to your question specifically, I believe, and the intent of this is to establish and more importantly, reinforce the relationship that individual companies have with the Department of Environmental Quality by promoting those active inspections, those active audits, those active educational opportunities, such that with their regularity in performing those inspections, these issues can be identified. The challenge now is, right, what we have today is infinity. There is nothing that I'm aware of that prevents an issue 5, 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago from not being enforced. And there is an example that we have in the state as it exists now for 10 years. But I believe that this, again, solidifies and performs, and more importantly, builds a foundation for the agency and the respective companies to work together. And within those 5 years, I believe the bandwidth within the DEQ has the framework and the people to ensure that companies are really doing the best they can and are not out of violations in that 5-year time frame.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely share your goals of what you're doing here, 100%. But we can inadvertently create some different problems and ambiguity. So that's really what I'm going at. I totally agree with the fact that to have nothing is not a good option, but that's not to say then, so what we put in place shouldn't be the best it can be and protect against, I think Senator Ross was referred to as, we have many good actors in our state, many good actors. But at any time a company can sell to someone who comes into our state and does not care, and they've learned all kinds of ways in operations in other states to avoid compliance and to do so in ways that are somewhat fraudulent. And so I think there needs to be protection a little bit for both scenarios. Anything that we begin with the statute of limitation where there's a presumption that everybody's going to obey the rules and go by the rules is a faulty way to do it. But I would say I agree with the basic premise, but again, I don't know where exactly this language in particular on the statute of limitation came from. And if you've looked at if you got it from maybe some different states of what they've done, could you give me some insight into that?
Chairman Ricard?
Please proceed.
President Law, it's a great question. These are the same questions that were asked by our predecessors, our neighboring states, obviously Montana, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado. Those questions were asked the same. So what we did is try to build a framework that captured their learnings from those bills into what we see today. So I mean, we could add more or detract, but what we took is the best we thought language between those 5 neighboring states and pulled them in together for a framework that we could build today, at least to present to this group. But to your credit and comment, yes, this is not an attempt to reward per se the good actors and not find the bad actors. It's just to provide some framework as our neighboring states have as well. So, and the EPA, if I may notice, the EPA has already in place, denoted through the Sackett versus EPA case in 2023, that 5-year statute of limitations is what they're going on. So even the EPA in this case, the federal government has agreed with the 5-year principle.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm not having any issue with the 5-year with it. So I really want to hone in on this idea of the language itself and how we can make it better. And so did any states, for example, have a provision as a part of their statute of limitations concerning fraud, and a way in which if fraud was demonstrated, it in some way then went back and extended that time based on the fraud? Anything like that? That's what I'm going for. I really, truly, I'm with you on the other. So any of those have those kind of a caveat in it concerning fraud?
Representative Conrad.
Chairman Burkhardt, it's a great question, and thank you. And I greatly appreciate your comments, Representative Law. I think at this point, in visiting with our folks at the DEQ, they may have some insight that may help in this matter. So I'd graciously turn the time over to them so they could add and more importantly promote.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And briefly, I just pulled up Colorado's provision, and they add a provision that indicates the 5-year period of limitation contained in this section does not apply where information regarding the alleged violation is knowingly or willfully concealed by the alleged violator. And if that gets tacked on at the end of this paragraph, then I think all of my concerns vanish.
Okay. Representative Conrad.
Chairman Burkhardt, Senator Rothfuss, that's a great friendly amendment, which I would sign on board.
Okay. All right. So other questions? Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Conrad, our DEQ is tasked with protecting our environment. And it seems like this puts some sideboards on that as they're trying to protect our environment. As I look throughout the other states in the union, for everyone that has a statute of limitation, there's another state that does not. So it's pretty equal, those that have versus those that have not. And our Supreme Court has ruled that there's no time bar for environmental damages claim. So has there thought been to why the state wants to put a time bar there when the Supreme Court said there should not be a time bar because they're saying cradle to grave. If you create a waste, you should be responsible for that for forever because you created it. It's the cradle to grave doctrine.
Representative Conrad.
Chairman Burkhardt, Representative Heiner, it's a great question. I agree with you wholeheartedly that as it relates to a legacy issue, those things should be taken care of. And as you're correctly denoted, that there are those who have and have not the statute of limitations. But what we used more importantly and reinforced our belief in this bill was the most recent decision by the Supreme Court, as I mentioned, Sackett versus EPA, that they have made clear that the general 5-year status of limitations for fines, penalties, and forfeitures run from the date of the violation applies to the EPA in this regarding their enforcement of the laws. So that was the framework that built this. And you're right, there are probably, as we speak today, some areas or items that have not been discovered. So I don't have a definitive yes or no, or more importantly, I guess, an answer to your concern or question.
Sorry, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I thought this language that I just found was going to satisfy me, but actually Representative Heiner raised a good concern, which made me think of some of our storage tanks, leaking underground storage tanks are a good example, as well as when we look at some of our earlier refineries that ended up having leakage from those refineries that honestly weren't detected for a long time. I don't think there was any knowingly or willful hiding of some of the contamination that came from them, but getting to the cradle to the grave concept, those are facilities that were in place for decades and leaked for probably decades as well. And it wasn't until a cleanup operation started to take place that the extent of the impact was fully known. Now, that may be governed by federal law, and that may take precedent over this. But let's assume that what we're putting in place in statute in Wyoming was governing. It seems to me that the obligation in that circumstance, even if it was 4 or 5 decades ago, should be staying with the creator of that long-term liability, even if they had the best of intentions, even if they worked with DEQ. So how do we remedy those longer-term legacy impacts, which were operated under the best of intentions, with this idea of a 5-year statute of limitations, where it would have been easy for, in those instances, them to say, well, that occurred between 20 and 70 years ago, all of the implications happened, so we're off the hook. And then that becomes state's liability, which is effectively what would happen is we, the people of the state of Wyoming, take on the liability instead of the operator.
Representative Conrad.
Sharon Burkhart, Senator Rothfuss. In this case, I would ask for input from our local environmental quality folks, as they know Region 8 is obviously the EPA much better than I do, and ask for their input and suggestions.
Okay. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Senator Rothfuss, I would at least direct you to page 2, lines 18 and 19. I think somewhat cover what you're talking about, the concept of the triggering of the 5 years. So we have the first step being the suspected violation, and the second trigger is the most recent date of suspected violation. So that may in part be where that.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay, so Representative, I have a real world example, and I'd like to know how it would be handled under this. Employee comes forward and says, I was here when we built this facility 20 years ago, literally, and when we were done with the construction, we dug a pit and we dumped all the waste left over from the construction, including drums of chemicals, in the pit and buried them. Okay, now the company went out immediately, dug up the area the employee identified. We notified DEQ of a potential, and that dug it up, actually found crushed drums. Analysis said there was nothing in them. They'd been washed clean. There was no residue or anything else. And what other trash was in there was, wood, concrete, that sort of thing. There was nothing hazardous in there. But if there had been, would that exempt all of that? Would this exempt all of that from fines and citations from the department? Because it was 20 years ago, even though people said, we were here, we're just coming forward now. We feel, management has changed. We feel our complaint would be accepted. So can you address that under this?
Chairman Burkhart, I can. It's a great example. Specifically in this, is your example, I have enough trust and faith in our Wyoming DEQ based on personal experience that they would work with the respective industrial user that in this case discovered that, look back at the facts associated with that, and come to some sort of agreement or consent decree as it relates to the cleanup of such matters. It is not intended to avoid or wash away or scrub or hide those issues that happened 20, 25 years ago.
Okay. So, all right, thank you. So I guess with that, I'd ask the department to come up and you've heard all of our questions and concerns with this. So let you speak to the bill, and maybe you can address a lot of those concerns and maybe possible fixes for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, much of the conversation is similar to the questions and concerns that we've had internally. So on the bill itself and the concept, I don't think that the agency has an objection to the concept here, particularly as it would relate to self-monitoring reports. And I think that's a good example. If you go back to the coal bed methane days, when everything was done with paper, we would have boxes and boxes of self-monitoring reports. And that was a question that we had at the time. You know, are you going to go back 5 years on these self-monitoring reports when in all reality it's already been corrected? And so what's the purpose behind that? So on self-monitoring reports, I think that's a good example of where this would be applicable. The areas where I would have concern, or the agency would have concern, and we've talked about this already, is the first off is where you have does it apply where the violation has been concealed or fraudulently kept from the agency? So that would be one thing that I think we would want to tighten up in the bill. The other is we often work through conference and conciliation or also through the voluntary remediation program. And so the question I would have is, and we have real life examples of this, is where somebody entered into the voluntary remediation program. We've been working with them through over a 5-year period, and they decide after the 5 years, yeah, I don't want to play in the voluntary remediation program anymore. Would we still have the authority then to take an enforcement action? Because that's what would typically happen. And we have examples where that is the case. And then I think I heard mention of then who then inherits the liability, and does that shift to the state, where you have now contaminated drinking water source or something of that nature as a result of the inability to continue with the action. The other thing that comes to mind is sometimes we're able to use a pattern of violation when we're looking at an enforcement action. And so now that would limit the pattern of violation to a 5-year period. That's probably less of an issue than some of these other things. But and then lastly, I would just say related to primacy. So we would want to have conversations with our federal counterparts, and I don't think this would be a problem, but I would certainly want to make certain that that doesn't create an issue with a primacy program. The fact that other states in the region already have statute of limitations would suggest to me that EPA would not have concern with that, but I don't know about the Office of Surface Mines or with the Department of Interior. That would be an area we would also want to confirm their position on, at least as it relates to coal. But for things like non-coal mines, that's state only, and there is no federal oversight there. So anyway, that's just kind of my quick rundown on some of the concerns, and I think if we could address those, that would be helpful.
Questions for the director? Question, Senator Office. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfit, are there any examples that immediately come to mind of areas where we would undoubtedly have full oversight? So there wouldn't be any possibilities of federal enforcement, EPA engagement. I'm really trying to think of examples where this would definitively come into play so that we can think through the implications in what would be real world examples. Do you have any sense of what it might clearly and directly apply to?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I completely understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up or restatement?
Yeah, so what you have on lines 20 through 23-ish on page 2 get to the fact that, you know, if it's preempted due to us having primacy, if it relates to EPA or other federal agencies, that come in conflict through rule and regulation, that this wouldn't necessarily apply, which makes sense. The challenge I have is it seems like almost everything you do at DEQ engages with federal law in some way. And I'm actually struggling to think of what this would certainly apply to, where it's all within the purview of the state and federal environmental law doesn't end up reaching in.
Director?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, so with non-coal mines on the land quality side would be an example, but not non-coal mine related to water or air issues, which would be covered under the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. One example would be the Industrial Siting Act, which is, there is no federal component there.
Follow up,
Yeah,
Senator?
and on that, would we have enforcement cases or enforcement actions associated with environment or industrial setting? I guess we would. That could happen.
Director?
So, Mr. Chairman, we could have enforcement actions that could happen with industrial siting. But the difference there is under the Industrial Siting Act, the Industrial Siting Council has no authority over anything that is covered by the rest of the agency. So solid waste, air and water would still run through those same programs, not through the Industrial Siting Act.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. One moment, Representative Lawley. Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I could be more direct with industrial siting. This language is in the Environmental Quality Act, so it wouldn't even apply to the Industrial Siting Act.
Thank you. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you talked about a couple different types of what I would categorize as alternative dispute resolutions with a particular group, where you mentioned mediation is one, and some others I didn't catch the names of, but you obviously have programs where you try to interact and resolve problems. Do those typically involve a kind of an agreement with that company or that organization to enter into that? And that's really my first question. I have a
Yeah,
Director.
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative, with the VRP or Voluntary Remediation Program, there is an agreement with the Conference and Conciliation, which is where we try to go, and that's provided in the statute, that we try to resolve these things rather than through enforcement action. Through Conference and Conciliation, there typically isn't an agreement. We're just working with the company to try to get resolution. And in this instance, if that were to exceed a 5-year period where we've been working with an entity and we weren't to be able to get to resolution, if we didn't take enforcement action, that's forcing us to take enforcement action within that 5-year period. And if we don't, then we would not have the ability to take enforcement action in the future. That would be a concern.
Okay, follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that one particular issue that you raised, would it be possible to implement agreements where part of the agreement tolls the statute of limitations? That's not uncommon in statute of limitation issues in general litigation, like in terms of like mediation and things, to have as a part of the agreement of mediation, a clear tolling of the statute while that process goes on. In other words, a pausing of it that helps preserve that. And again, then people to not use the process in order to slip their way through the statute of limitation situation. So I just put that out. That's why I asked about it, and as a possible way to address that specific little issue.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley. Yeah, I believe so with the VRP program, less so with the Conference and Conciliation, because there really isn't a legal document in play at that point.
Senator Rothfuss, I got it right that time.
You did. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parvit, getting to kind of the applicability towards we'll say environmental liability from some legacy circumstance like a refinery closure. We discussed that a few minutes ago. So we'll say that we know it happened. Everybody agreed it happened. It happened between 50 and 30 years ago, whatever the leak was, but you don't know it until today. They're closing down the facility. Everyone is understanding it. Would that even be an event that would be relevant to an enforcement case or an enforcement action? Is that how it would be handled under the Environmental Quality Act? Or is it actually elsewhere in statute that environmental liability would be governed? And you may not know the answer to that, but I'm trying to get a sense of what this would actually apply to.
Director?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, in the instance of and I'll give you two examples maybe, but in the instance of a refinery, I don't know that necessarily would prohibit us from moving forward, because it's from the time the violation is, well, maybe that's a good change, when the violation is discovered. And it's really, how do you define what's the initiation timeline? But we've worked with refineries in the past, and we take enforcement actions and come up with consent decrees and how we're going to move forward. Another example, though, is we had a facility where in the 80s, EPA came in and oversaw some reclamation work. They signed off on it as being complete. Later, we found that it wasn't complete and was actually impacting groundwater and then public drinking water supplies. In that instance, I would be concerned that we would then not be able to go back and say, then the state inherits the liability, essentially, as maybe as an orphan site.
Maybe that's all.
Okay.
And the discovery,
Other questions? So, Director, Representative Conrad, I think the concept here is to not allow the department to just randomly go back forever. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is a component of it, yes.
Okay, so conceptually, would it help solve some of these problems if the language indicated that it's 5 years from the date a violation becomes known to the department?
Mr. Chairman, respectfully, that defeats the whole purpose of the statute of limitations, because at that point, they can discover anything 10 years in advance. And then what that language that you propose would just ensure that within 5 years, it's addressed and dealt with. So I would not be in favor of that.
Okay, all right. Other questions? Okay, thank you. So with that, public comment. Anyone online? Okay, anyone in the room? Okay, with that, I'll close public comment. Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we table this bill.
Okay. Okay. And the purpose for tabling it, I think I know, but I would just like you to.
Mr.
indicate.
Chairman, I believe that this takes away from the authority and some of the protection we have with the Department of Environmental Quality. And I believe that it could, I think we've all been aware of how much the state is paying for environmental cleanup when it gets into the waters of the state. It's very expensive and very time consuming. This would provide an out for some of these companies that have the wherewithal to be able to clean it up, to be able to get out of that kind of a situation. And I just think it's a situation that we should not broach at this time.
Okay, other discussion? Okay, generally, we don't have a discussion on motions to table. They're an up or down vote. So, but I thought I would give Senator Rothfuss.
As the second, I'd be willing to withdraw the second if the movement would withdraw so that we can discuss, and then I'll once again second it, because you're right, from a parliamentary standpoint, we probably shouldn't debate after the motion, but I think it's worth discussing. So if the movement is so inclined, I'll withdraw my second.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I will withdraw that for the
Okay.
time being.
Thank you. Discussion on the bill, and for people's understanding, a motion to table is a very high motion that, like I said, generally we would immediately vote it up or down, but I think we need to have some discussion on the bill. So if you'd hold your motion and have the discussion, go ahead, please. And I'll start with Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The upside I like, the downside is so uncertain and so much unknown that I'm just uncomfortable at this time, late in the interim, moving a bill like this forward, because I'll just candidly say, I don't understand the implications of it. I can say that with full confidence that I don't understand the implications of what this bill would do. And for a bill of this potential magnitude, where, as Representative Heiner was saying, there are circumstances that it could be quite substantial. Somebody always has the liability for cleanup. So it's either the responsible party, the owner that ends up purchasing it after the fact, maybe unknown, or the people of the state of Wyoming. This doesn't eliminate responsibility. It just leads to circumstances under which responsibility shifts to the state of Wyoming. And, on behalf of the folks that I represent, I don't feel comfortable accepting that on behalf of them based on not understanding the implications.
Okay. Representative Heiner, further discussion from you. You were the one who was going to make the motion. Okay. Representative Lawley.
Well, I think the bill could be improved and needs work, but I do think in light of everything we have going on and on our plate already, that probably tabling is the best thing, and maybe we can talk about it at another time.
Okay. All right. So Representative Conrad, would you like to make any comments at this point?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I would. I think it's interesting, the discussion that's been had here. It's interesting as we look at our neighboring states. Obviously, they've wrestled with the same type of discussions, et cetera, and found a viable way forward. It's interesting to me that we talk about government involvement in the ability to govern. That speeding ticket you got 10 years ago, it's now discovered via camera. Should you be held accountable for that? I just think it's a short-sighted motion to table at this point. It's disappointing. And it's interesting, those who promote less governance defend their actions, but on one hand, they'll contradict themselves in some degree of hypocrisy. Now want more and allow the government to be more involved. So that's all I have to say respectfully.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. So I tend to agree with people. We need to work this a lot more than we can do roughly at the last interim committee meeting for the year. I think the concept is good. It's implementing that concept where it protects all the parties, gives the department the abilities they need, protects people from egregious enforcement, which I'm not saying the department does. So with that, I think Representative Heiner, if you wish to make your motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, without making any slide remarks, I would like to make a motion that we table this.
Okay. And motion is seconded. And so committee, we vote this up or down. It's a motion to table under parliamentary procedures. That's it. We're done with the debate. It's really not a debatable motion. We've had the discussion. Am I correct, Brian, with this? Okay. So with that, is it a voice vote? Okay. All in favor of tabling and allow the sponsors to continue working on it, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no?
No.
Okay, the motion to table carries. And I would ask the sponsors and the department to continue really to work on this issue. So with that, committee, people in the room, people on Zoom, it is almost 12:30. We had planned an hour and a half for lunch, which I am not inclined to do. I think an hour would be plenty if that's agreeable to the committee. I have Representative Tarver making strange visual expressions. He needs an hour and a half, I guess. Sorry, I think we're going to take an hour. We'll be back at 1:30, unless anybody wants it shorter than that. Anybody want less than an hour for lunch? Okay, we recess for an hour and 5 minutes. We'll be back at 1:30.